order. And first I'll go ahead and just open it up to public comments. If we have any public comments. No.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, could I introduce a member of the public that is here with us today?
Sure.
She's an intern with Nancy Mace's office. Her name is Anna Lepore, and she's observing public meetings as part of her internship. And I'd just like to welcome her to our meeting.
Welcome, Anna. Welcome. And we'll be giving you a quiz at the end of this. All part of your education.
And we expect the paper.
And donuts next time. I will go ahead and.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, you opened up the public comment, but would that entail discussing Libby Anderson's email?
That's what I'm just going to.
Okay, sorry.
I wanted to go ahead and make sure that we all have this as part of our packet. I don't know if you had a chance to look at this or not, but this will come up at our upcoming meeting. When Libby is here, I will ask if she would like to give us a brief explanation of what she's wanting to try and accomplish with this. I've read through it. I have a lot of comments on different parts of this, but try and make sure that you all take a look at this. This is in, I think, in total, if not mostly, chapter 4. So we will be covering chapter 4, and we can include this as public comments to chapter 4 as we get to that. I think also I'd like to go to Kurt and ask you if you've got anything that you want to bring forward to the board.
Sure, I guess we have chapter 8 advertised for Monday. So we have a meeting on Monday. So that's, if you are able to get through it tonight, or this afternoon, I mean, we could. Nick is kind of typing this meeting. We could send it to you tomorrow, post it online. Essentially, you know, you could act on it. So if you're comfortable with that, I just want to pass that on. And 2, 3, and 4, I kind of decided that they needed to go together because they're all kind of tied together. But I also just wanted to mention per the email that these were kind of the first chapters that were looked at when the whole process started almost 2 years ago. And those original changes were much more minor in scope than what happened as we got to chapter 7 and 9 and 5. And I think that was just the direction at the time. And so haven't spent any additional time since 2023 on these. There were kind of some basic revisions based on 120 point kind of Excel sheet that was given to me from time past. So, you know, I think it sounds like you want to go further than that. So, you know, I think we'll do that collaboratively, right? So it's probably all together, 2, 3, and 4. You know, you can have zoning and setbacks and design. They all just, if you change one, it's going to change the other chapter. So could take some time to go through all this. So that's just, you know, my spiel here, but that's it.
Great. What about the email that I sent last night?
Oh, yeah, about the nuisance. You know, I think you can ask the but I think the intent was maybe because of the issues at the apartment complex and also the kind of rental that were causing problems, if there was a way to do it beyond the land use regulation. I think that was what they were wanting to know.
I'm sorry, I didn't get to that.
Repeated noise.
It's a town delay. Can you?
Well, last night, or I guess it was 2 nights ago, at the work session, which was audio recorded, I was listening to it last night. JJ Suave made a presentation about kind of wanting to know if the council wanted to have a brand new nuisance ordinance. We do not have a nuisance ordinance right now. And he had some material from North Carolina and other jurisdictions that he talked about, and there's some discussion of that, but it sounds like they're talking about doing that outside of this code revision process, which, not that I'm asking for more work, but it seems to me that that might well need to go into chapter 12 or some work that we're already doing, we haven't gotten to yet. And I also have, having litigated nuisance issues for many years and having under various ordinances, various municipalities, and having some experience with nuisance ordinance, there's a lot of pros and cons of having local nuisance ordinances. And I think that if the council might be interested in getting some input from the planning commission that, but if they think they have an emergency and they want to do it another way, they might want to do it another way. But I just wanted to, the email was a question, why is this going outside of the planning commission process? And Kurt, I guess, has answered that
Yeah,
question.
I think the plan, I don't think they had just draft ordinances, if I remember. I haven't been involved with that. Was to approve it with just the general code. So it wouldn't go in the development code. I think that's why. So anything in the development code goes to the planning commission, anything municipal code just goes.
Well, some of them, I think, there's an intersection in my mind anyway. And the intersection is that one of the things they, in the discussion after that presentation, was they wanted to know what they can make land, owners do to control their property and how they can enforce those issues. And so to me, if you're gonna be, if that's gonna be part of it, and I don't know what it looks like right now, because there was no exact draft, they were gonna put one together. There's some issues there that may intersect with the development process,
And
so.
the short-term rental thing, I think is also, I'm not entirely sure, kind of two different places. There's a section of the development code and there's like business license, sort of type of thing, and business license kind of handles it right now, but originally I think they were directing it to the planning commission. I'm not so sure after Tuesday night. I really don't.
So maybe we could ask you, Kurt, to possibly clarify if they want any input from us, say, we're happy to provide some, but if you don't want it, that's fine too, but let us know.
Some nuisance ordinance.
That and if, also if there's something about short-term rentals, they have, something, if they want some.
We have something.
The short-term rental situation needs a lot of work in this community. I'll just say that. I mean, I've got lots of ideas about it, but we don't have to get into that now.
No, but we can ask if they're interested in our input.
Sure.
And and that'll be up to them, the city council.
Most of the short-term stuff, I think, is like on the website, and it's not necessarily a quote.
Well, there's a short-term rental section in our code.
But the website kind of,
It's strange, just they did a presentation and it's in our code. It kind of goes by zoning. There's a neighboring cap. So if they change something related to that, it would have to come to the planning commission. But the administration and processing and kind of the rest of the short-term rental is through finance and business.
Yeah,
It's just a separate, however, some of the enforcement obviously goes through this department, but really it's kind of a business license thing. So it's odd. And I think they've had a lot of complaints, and so it's a question about what to change. So.
Well, I think that's an interesting conversation. I know we do have something in here about short-term rentals. We have to
Yeah, it's in
deal with and address.
these chapters that we're getting to.
And-
Chapter 2, I think. Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think we'll want to have some input as well
All right, I will
from council.
send that.
During their chapter 2 review process, you're gonna have plenty of opportunity to give input into it regardless, where the council specifically asked for it. I mean, it's in the code and it needs a lot of work.
Yeah, okay. I would just state the planning commission, is requesting direction on. 'Those items.
appreciate it. Anything else, Kurt?
No.
The only thing I have is, on your, chapters, 2, 3, and 4. We got portions of 2, 3, and 4. We did not get the whole chapter. And we really need to have a whole chapter to do our reviews.
Okay, yeah, I was just showing what had been for discussion. These are the only things that had been discussed at the city council thus far. That's
Yeah.
what we got.
And I appreciate that, but, right now we'll be working off of a bunch of different, copies of stuff, that we don't want to do. And, but let me make one other suggestion. Starting now, as we go forward with everything. Once we get done making our comments at the table. I think that, a red line copy is appropriate, but we get multiple red line copies and I know that we can date them, but just printing a bunch of paperwork, I think we need to, as a commission, maybe, when we get done with our comments in each of our sections, I think we as a board can say we would like to have these incorporated and reprinted or not, and just keep going with what we have. So we don't get a lot of multiple copies. So
So when you say incorporated and reprinted, do you want a clean copy at the next meeting, or you want?
why don't we address that at the end of each session and let the board say, this is what we'd like to have. And you've been trying to accommodate us with everything, so we get clean copies, we get red line copies. And sometimes when it takes multiple sessions, then we have multiple red lines and multiple clean copies. And so, rather than going through that process, making you do that for us, I think we'll just have the board make a decision at the end of our session, what we would have liked to have done. And so maybe sometimes we say, don't do anything, we just want to continue on with what we have. But we will then make the decision about what we'd like staff to present to us for the next meeting. Make it a little easier.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, and then the last thing I'd like to do is I want to go back to where we kind of started from a long time ago. And so starting with chapter 8, as we go through these, when we get into each chapter, I'd like to start out with saying anybody that has any overarching kind of things they want to say that are influential to the entire chapter. Let's start out with those. I think Benji did that a few times before too. But I'd like to start out with that, and then we'll get into the granular part of it. But we've kind of gone back and forth, and maybe it'll help streamline it if we go ahead and start with that overarching comments for major changes. We can decide whether we want to proceed with those or if we want to get go to the granular side of it. So so with that, without any objections, any other comments from the board? Paul?
I've got a number. My first one, first of all, there's language, we'll get to it. There's language which is redundant and doesn't actually read correctly, but we'll get to all that. The first big one that I've got has to do with the setback issues. And
We're in chapter 8, aren't we?
yeah, chapter
Yes.
What page you on?
well, I'm looking at page 2 of 21 on my sheet here. And so the proposal, when in some cases, I think Libby's memo recommended 100 feet, and others been 50 feet. And former code was 30 feet or whatever, but I think that the planning commission needs to have a little bit of discretion based on certain circumstances. You know, last meeting I mentioned this restaurant that's just opened out here, and they have a deep bluff, for example, it's pretty high. And so they're gonna be closer to the critical line. But why wouldn't, you know, if that was a new place, why wouldn't it have a deck, for example, overlooking that vista, that kind of thing? And if you took a strict literal interpretation of what's proposed, you wouldn't be able to do that. Then the city itself, I mean, if you stroll down below Bay Street and walk along down in front of Buford Elementary and so forth, I mean, they are literally mowing the marsh. I mean, they got a lawnmower and they mow it. And so, you know, I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it illustrates the fact that, you know, if you've got a setback from the critical line, the city at least is completely disregarding that.
Or the open space land trust, whoever's.
Yeah, whoever, yeah, so,
But there is language specific to that. This basically says that you're not allowed to do that.
yeah,
So either we need to change that language or.
precisely. So I think that this board, on a case-by-case basis, you can certainly have the regulation in place. Septic tanks, you know, are certainly a setback for any septic tanks that remain, that sort of thing, pursuant to what Libby had to say. But I think that this board needs discretion, so that's one major point. The next big point is the Soloco manual. The Soloco manual was adopted by ordinance in 2022 by the city. So we already got it, and we're already supposed to be abiding by it. And there are multiple versions of it. I don't know if y'all know it, but this is a 466-page document. I mean, it's massive. And so my fundamental questions are, in what cases does it apply and in what cases does it not apply? And I think we need to examine that pretty carefully. You know, you've got.
Well, before you go any further,
Yep.
I think that within these chapters, we specifically reference Soloco.
Yep.
So that would answer the question of where and when.
Well,
In my mind.
I know that the city engineer, which is farmed out, relies on, you know, you have to meet the Soloco standard. The town of Bluffton, for example, has modified the Soloco document. You know, I don't know precisely what document the city is relying on, to tell you the truth, when they're administering this, when the engineers are examining it, but.
I'm not familiar with the Soloco. I think I asked if staff, if we get a copy of that here available to us.
It's a big document.
It's a big document.
Yeah,
And-
but we should have one here in the office
Yeah,
that's available to us.
Yeah, if we approve this, we'll do that.
so, you know, not,
Do you have like a big binder that's the Soloco thing here
Not just like-
physically present? You just look it
No,
up online.
But I want to go back to Paul's question. If there's multiple publishing of that, I would expect Soloco goes with the most recent publication of it. Or are they making modifications to it on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis?
town of Bluffton modified by ordinance the original Soloco document. And my understanding, and y'all can tell me, my understanding is that the city, the engineer, again, not a city employee, but that engineer is relying on the Bluffton version of the Soloco manual when examining the project. That's my
Let
understanding.
me ask,
Well, we
has,
can't do that.
has the city of Beaufort adopted?
Yes.
And so then the only question is if it's adopted, what version is it adopted? That's the only question, right?
Yeah, I think it was just adopted as a.
Probably the original.
I think
So
we could,
so probably to the extent we reference it in our code, we just need to either reference the most current version or we have to say, edition 3,
However, I think we
2021 or whatever.
Paul, that's a good point. We probably should reference the Bluffton model because it's
That's what I think.
much better for the city because the county model is kind of a negative.
So wait a second, so which one is the city?
We've been using the Bluffton model since they revised it.
But has
Because
the city officially, is
it
the,
takes into account an urban area.
but let me ask you, I'm just trying to get this, is if the city council, the city of Beaufort has adopted Soloco manual, are you following the one that the city council has adopted, or are you following one that another city has adopted? That wouldn't make sense.
Well, we've been.
Well, you can only legally follow the one that they've adopted, that's the answer.
We've been kind of using the Bluffton model for the last few months.
Even though that isn't, I don't know how much different it is, but I think,
It gives a lot of, it handles runoff a lot better for a city than a county.
well, how do you, just curious, how do you,
adopted officially?
how do you follow a different manual than the one the city council has adopted?
Well, we have a different set of stormwater regulations than our current development.
No, I'm asking,
That might be from me in Colorado. We had, each city they had. I guess I didn't really think about it. It just seemed like we should do a better model. We have like a Fort Collins model.
well, that
It was
happens,
all just adopted by the whole area. Each entity had a separate.
I get that part, I'm just saying that,
Yes.
but what I'm getting at is if the
Well, I
the
agree.
city of Beaufort has adopted a specific model, we have to follow whatever that model is.
My recommendation would be to follow the Bluffton model.
I think that.
If you,
But we have to either adopt that in our code, which then the city council adopt, or until then, presumably we're following the model that the city has adopted.
I think as a practical matter, this document is so complicated. An effort to literally follow this thing is practically impossible. So just, if you'll indulge me just 1 minute, in the county's version, just for example, this is an illustration of a rain garden. So they don't want you to use a pond under the Soloco manual, to treat any stormwater. They want that merely to be a flood issue. They don't want it to be a treatment issue, which is the way it's always been. And so, my brother built a house on Spring Island and it's on a 2-acre lot and he had to put in a 6-foot by 6-foot rain garden on a 2-acre lot. And so this is the literal problem that you encounter when you're dealing with the Soloco manual. So I think that Kurt is absolutely correct that whatever modifications the town of Bluffton made were rightly made in light of a more urban situation, which would apply to the town of Beaufort. I want to make one more comment because this is just background information. So I grew up on Battery Creek. And at the time there were some, everybody had a septic tank and there were some discharges under NPDES permits and that sort of thing going into Battery Creek. And we lived in Battery Creek and ate shrimp and fish and, we never got sick. And so I looked up on the county's website data. They monitor the creek. Now, this is not full historic data, but I think it paints a little bit of a picture. And there are certain things that are measured. Biochemical oxygen demand, which is the amount of oxygen an organism needs to degrade matter, dissolved oxygen in the water, fecal coliform, suspended solids. These are all sort of standard measurements. And when you look at the county's data, there's no appreciable difference in Battery Creek in this monitoring station over a 5-year period. So, and what I'm trying to get to is the point of the matter. I'm not in any way suggesting that we should not forthrightly do the right thing with stormwater treatment and so forth. I'm only suggesting that this document is, I don't know how we're going to deal with it if we're going to take a literal interpretation, but I've got this data and I thought you might find it interesting that there is no degradation in, of the waters in spite of recent development. So there you have it. Those are my comments on chapter 8.
Well,
Big picture.
So,
I think we have certain areas that were developed in the seventies. They're in low-lying areas that flood, and they're all on septic. And they will continue to be on septic, probably. And so I know that we're in newer develops, we don't have that developments, we don't have that problem because we've reestablished the code about having to be on a central sewer system. And we did that, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. And so I think those are good things. We still have that same problem. The older seventies places that are on septics close to our waterways are still doing the same thing, but yeah, I agree with you, Paul.
I only make the comment, you know, they measure human fecal contamination and animal fecal. And in these cases, you know, all this data says no detection. Now, I'm not discounting what you say, and I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be concerned about septic tanks, but my concern is that we're looking at this 466 page Soloco that is politically correct, I guess, perhaps, but it's, you know, also filled with things like putting in a 6x6 rain garden on a 2-acre lot. So there you have it.
Okay.
so I think just, well, Paul was talking, I was looking at my phone and there seems to be, there's a Bluffton version, there's a Hardyville version, there's a bunch of different versions out there. So I think it's extremely important that we specify what version, and to address the issue of amendments, I just think we say the Bluffton Soloco manual as it may be amended from time to time, or whatever it is we choose, if it's some other one.
I think that would be good, and, you know, this doesn't sound great, does it? But we have a stormwater code that we're not enforcing. We adopted this other and then it changed the code. I will agree with Paul. But I know, like, until a few months ago, we were kind of using the county model, but it was becoming exceptionally difficult for everyone, especially the smaller projects. This thing is bad for the bigger projects, it was the smaller projects that were the more urban area projects, which we are supposedly supporting, right? We're almost, you know, we're being incredibly penalized by the stormwater regular county. So because the same engineer wrote the manual that we use, a consulting engineer, he suggested to use the Bluffton manual. Made more sense. They were involved in that. So we should probably, you know, this is just part of that. We should probably just adopt that Bluffton because it makes it a lot easier for infill, especially around.
Well, I think another important point that Paul made was we might want to consider discretion in the planning commission. Regardless of what version of Soloco we decide to recommend be applied, because there's always going to be those situations such as the house that is measured with a rain garden or some other smaller project or even a bigger project that is going to require exercise of discretion in order to, you know, reasonably apply these standards.
Well, I'll throw one other monkey wrench into the thing. If we adopt Soloco with the version for Bluffton and as updated by Bluffton, well, what if we want to make updates to that one too?
I mean, I think we're making a mistake by referencing Bluffton at all, but I think you take a version of it. It may just happen to be the version that was, but we have to reference it by virtue of the edition, the year, and that sort of thing. And then as there are changes, you know, I mean, we either say in our code the most recent update, or we specify it, and then we have to review those changes to it. Unfortunately, we don't have such a place as more sophisticated jurisdictions where I came from. We don't have an agency that reviews all the stormwater management plans, I guess. They're reviewed by you. If you had an agency, if you had an agency like a sewer district that has other authority and they've got professional engineers that are part of that staff and they review these plans, then that's what we rely on, but we don't. So we're by faith, we're adopting this manual, which I guess is what every jurisdiction is doing, because part of it goes back to what the Clean Water Act requires of jurisdictions like ours. So it's not that it just came out of the sky, it's part of it, a large part of this is compliance with the Clean Water Act. And so, unfortunately, it's gonna fall pretty much to the staff to understand that, because we can't as individuals,
But we need to put notice of what the guiding principles are somehow into
Right,
the code.
right.
So that applicants and developers and the public
That's
can
all I'm saying.
understand what we're talking about.
That's all I'm saying is when staff tells us which one they're following, they'll tell us how to identify it, appropriately. And I guess it's a certain model that's currently followed by Bluffton. But it's gonna ultimately be up to our city then to adopt changes to that, probably at the city council level. I don't know if they need to, those changes need to come through us.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest that we go ahead and we establish here that we're going to move forward based on the Bluffton's version of the SoCo loco standards as of a certain date. And then, and I would say, we could establish today, right now, as that date. And then any modifications that are done by Bluffton or that our staff feels like they need to be made, they will go through that review process and approval process for Beaufort.
Why don't we just say anything that our staff changes? I don't know that we necessarily. If you wanna look to Bluffton, but it just seems that
Well, I'm just
any
saying,
specific reference to Bluffton just seems inappropriate.
Well, I think we just referenced the version that
Right,
we want to reference,
exactly.
and then as Kim said, as may be amended from time to time, and then you have to decide by who, by this body, by the engineer, consulting engineer, and then approved by this body. I don't know who amends it, but
well, I think they need to go through staff and either it can be administrative through staff or staff decides it needs to come through the commission and come through us.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking.
Right, I think.
This would, the way it was done is that it would just follow whatever the most current standard was.
Who does the amending to the Bluffton version? Do you know, Kurt?
Bluffton.
City council, yeah.
The city council of
Yeah,
Bluffton?
so if you amended this, you'd be amending the city ordinance, and I was just saying you'd be amending it to the most current, so local standard. I can talk to our city attorney, but the idea was that you'd just be referencing another set of standards.
But there is no single set of Soloco standards.
There is.
Apparently, well, the county and Bluffton apparently are different, at least in certain regards.
Yeah, the jurisdictions, I think, that are larger have decided that they have the capacity and they made some changes because original was just, that's the issue.
We're gonna just have to rely on, professional staff to tell us,
Yeah,
which is, what changes to be adopted over time, all that sort of stuff.
so that's what I was doing as a reference.
Yeah.
And so our engineer, who's Jason Petrick, is out of Columbia, and he's looking at Cormac Taylor. But Cormac Taylor is the one that drafted regulations for both Bluffton and
Beaufort County.
and Beaufort County. And so that's why, it makes sense because we're using the same consultant that drafted these regulations.
Is there a link on the city's website to the actual Soloco standards that are being used by staff? Could we do that? Could we
Yeah, we can
put that and
do that.
keep that
I
updated?
mean, and why they adopted them in 2022 and didn't take out this section of the code, I don't know.
Because it really could just say you're gonna go by the Soloco.
Yeah, that's what I
Almost
did.
period.
That's what I
And
did,
that's
is
it.
I basically just deleted
Yeah.
the rest of it. And then just said so. But, I think you make a good point, Bluffton standards probably would be.
We just need to take that
Document
document.
the actual document name and reference it here.
That's it.
And also make it accessible through the website. And we can even put in the code that, a link to the document, is maintained on the city of Beaufort's website.
And the only other issue is to whom or what does it apply? Does it apply to every single thing? Does it apply to an existing house in Mossy Oaks that's been there since 1965?
It's 5,000 square feet of historic area.
Well, in the new,
So does that make sense?
in the new language we have in this code, we have what it applies to, and then it says exemptions. That's what's proposed for our review.
Those are the things that I think we need to have a conversation about.
So is the main difference with the Bluffton, I'm not familiar with it, the Bluffton versus county is the rain garden size?
No, I don't think so. I think that Bluffton was modified to adapt to a more urban environment in lieu of, countywide regulation.
Yeah, it was
We
becoming
ought
more
to get
difficult.
change version that we adopt if Bluffton makes a change.
No, that's still in.
No.
So the important thing to note here, all the exemptions are from Bluffton. So I've kind of, everything you're looking at here is really from Bluffton. These are the changes Bluffton's made. And so, yeah, I should have probably put Bluffton, so we'll feel something. But, they've recently adopted all this stuff, so all these wetland changes, and
Yeah, I think we
they
just,
spent a lot of time on it.
think we established the version right
Mm-hmm.
now, and then you don't follow changes and don't say that, we're staying with whatever Bluffton decides to do. From this point on, City of Beaufort will decide what changes will be applied.
Precisely.
At staff level or at city of council, city of council level?
The adoption now of that,
Okay, you're talking
Or
about
the
future
changes,
changes, you
future
said
changes.
future changes, so.
I'm saying future changes can either be done by staff, or if staff feels it needs to go back to the commission because it's significant enough that they would make that recommendation.
I think that's a good idea. Staff should be able to have some discretion as to changes
Yeah,
and so
minor
forth.
changes,
Yeah, they happen.
and there's certainly going to be more expertise than whatever the board is at the time, probably.
Just so you know, it's 5,000 square feet of disturbed area. It's triggers, but so most houses are under 5,000. Your house, Mike. Just joking. but-
Right away.
Yep.
Paris.
But yeah.
Most houses are under
Side,
5,000.
driveways, the whole thing.
That makes sense, but everything else is pretty much being triggered, right?
I do think this conversation needs to go to city council at the next city council meeting to inform them of where we are and asking them for their adoption of what we're committing to.
Well, that's if you guys approve stuff at the next meeting. If you want, I think I heard Bill. maybe line on the terms here. Stated that we should get the actual version and reference that in this code, and we can do that tomorrow or I'm sitting here, we can get that version. Put it in this code. Is that what I heard?
We should put the name of it in the code and we should put a link to it on the city
Yeah, we-
website. And then we should say in the code that if there's a link on the website to find it, so they
Yeah,
can
the
get it.
engineers can find it for sure, but here's the site work permit checklist right here for the city of Beaufort. It just simply says, and comply with Soloco Stormwater Manual. So that's obviously needs to be adjusted.
Yeah, and that'll be updated, I think the link and all that stuff after the code gets adopted.
Okay.
We got that one. We can have that done tomorrow.
Right.
Any home rest.
Does anybody else have anything else that's any overarching on this?
I think my overarching is basically just on that, going from the 38 feet to the 50 feet and after reading Lizzie's comments, it makes sense that maybe we look into, not just applying that to everything, but the type of it development, like the single family where it's done at multi-family.
Yeah, I think we'll get to that because we're gonna go through that table along with the written part. I think there's a disconnect between, right now, between the written part and the table in my mind. I think I'm saying the same things. But, yeah, definitely like to go through that too. Anything else? Paul, did you think about where you would be, inserting something about, flexibility in here?
I did on page 2. Under 8.2.3. Let's see here. I just put, I just hand wrote language subject to the discretion of the planning commission. In under 8.2.3A, pads, decks, open air structures. And then I'm, up to 80 square feet, are permitted. But I think that we need to take out the 80 square feet and just simply put at the discretion of the planning commission. Such decks are permitted. Because I think that, again, on a case-by-case basis, if you had a restaurant, they would need more than that. If you had an apartment complex, I've seen the design for the one that was supposed to be built back here on Battery Creek that's never been built, and they had a sort of a swimming pool complex and a crabbing dock and some other things which would exceed that by a pretty good bit. And they may have already been approved. I don't know what the status of their plan is, but it's just that based on the merits of the plan, the planning commission needs to have a large degree of discretion, it seems to me, about encroachments into the setback area.
The only thing I would say about that is that's good for major subdivisions that come before you, but most of the requests are like a Benji, sitting right next to me, wants to build a deck, is, right, he's gonna call up and ask if he can do it with our, and I don't, do you want to provide, I mean, it's pretty discretionary already. Right, I don't think that person is gonna want to go, how do they go to a planning commission or something like that? Does that make sense?
I just kind of have an issue with the way this is worded anyway. So if you read 8.2.3, the entire buffer shall be undisturbed, period. Indigenous vegetation removal in the tidal area buffer is limited to that necessary to provide for structure/activity permitted by this subsection and to provide for reasonable sightlines with the following exceptions. And then they put the exceptions, but I mean, it seems like sort of like a kind of a double negative sort of a situation. Is this meant to say it's okay to remove indigenous vegetation for paths, steps, decks, open air? I think if it means it's allowed, I think we should not use the term exceptions. I think we need to change that language because it just reads, at least to me, strangely.
It's not easy to administer. It's come up, but yeah, I think we could use we could just change that whole thing.
But it's pretty important though, isn't it, to not disturb the indigenous vegetation?
It is important not to disturb the buffer. Just whatever the buffer is determined to be, it's very important not to disturb the buffer. But any disturbances, any permitted disturbances, there should be a degree of discretion is all I'm trying. I don't know how the magic works. I don't know what they should be. That's all I'm trying to suggest.
I would suggest that we put a period in the second line of 8.2.3 after the word sightlines. So it's the end of the second sentence. And then add cross out with the following exceptions and then put in the discretion of the planning commission, the following may be permitted.
Well, again, I have to say that you're probably not gonna be sick. Did you want, like, Benji,
Yeah.
we get this like, I mean, literally every
Single-family
week,
houses.
you know, like, you got steps or something, because there's a lot of properties.
Well, then, you know, then even if,
Do you want them all coming to the planning?
no, we don't. How about if we
Because I think
say,
that's how you're,
how about if we say the following may be permitted in the discretion of staff?
well, that's basically the way it is now.
Well, I don't
I
think
think
that's
it's
good
clear.
either, you know, I mean, I think that you either permit, if you're gonna have a code, you have to, codes are meant to be black and white, you know, and this goes to a subject that I raised many times ago, we should have in our code a general waiver section that, because we've been trying to deal with these things on a section by section basis, and if you have a general waiver section, then there would be standards, there are discretionary review standards for all that manner of things that could go through a discretionary waiver review process. Not meaning that we're gonna grant a lot of waivers, but there would be applicable to all different code sections where you're trying to get relief, other than the ones that by statute have to go to the Board of Zoning Adjustment. Those are dimensional issues by statute, they have to go there. So, I mean, we can continue to try to carve out these exceptions in something like this, but it gets really hard to do it without undermining the code altogether. If you just start saying, this is what we're requiring, but at the discretion of the planning commission, we can allow relief without any guidance, but as to how you grant that relief. I just think
Yeah, I mean,
it gets really.
what would be the acts that you would, if go to the planning commission here, I don't know, right? If you were just like, you know, it was Benji's lot and you want to put steps, so you build a deck and.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if we just want to allow steps, we allow steps. If we want to allow,
Yeah.
you know, certain things, but I think when we start trying to, my point is when you go beyond a defined set of things like yard furniture, steps and so forth, it becomes really hard to start just on a broad discretionary basis, just start saying, well, this guy deserves some relief because he seems to, you know, he came up with some thoughts about why he should, but we don't even really tell him how to state his case. See what I'm saying? And maybe when we get through this section, maybe we should step back and just look at a broad waiver section that we should add to the code that would deal with a lot of these things for us.
Sure.
Because we're gonna probably, as we go through 2, 3, 4, we're gonna probably keep running into these very specific design restrictions, and then we want to grant relief, and the question is gonna be, how do we do it? See what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I personally don't think this is a good place for this discretion, because most of these things are things that a private citizen's going to do, and is it really appropriate? How do you even get them to play?
No, that's what I'm saying. Some of these we can just list as exceptions, just as you have.
Yeah,
What
let's
Paul said, the reason it came up this way is Paul it was applying to the deck thing. You know, and he wanted to create an exception for decks to be larger than 80 square feet, maybe be 2,000 square feet. How do we, what I'm saying is, how do we exercise that discretion?
Well, I mean, you can get a variance on it or an appeal, right? That's
Well-
I mean, could we add an exception that says something like projects that go through the planning commission could be at the discretion of the planning commission?
You could say commercial projects, you know, which would be the only thing that might require such a deck, you know, which are otherwise reviewed by the planning
And I'm
commission
getting,
anyway.
what I'm getting at is just if we create separate and apart from just this thing here, a general waiver section in the code that would allow us to take a number of these different things that we've confronted so far and are gonna confront as we continue through the rest of the code through a separate application process where they file an application for a waiver, and these are the 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 different tests that we need to take into account in granting of a waiver, or we can call it something else, we can call it relief.
But shouldn't that go to zoning really, as opposed to us?
To Board of Zoning Adjustment,
Yeah,
well,
That's
I
a
talked about this,
statutory.
the statute, most places other than here, delegate to the Board of Zoning Adjustment just dimensional issues. And there's a lot of things in the code that aren't related to dimensional. Ours is a little bit iffy on that, and we had the code as it exists today and the way that we've went through some revisions already, we have granted ourselves the authority to grant certain exceptions without going to the Board of Zoning Adjustment. And I think part of our reason for doing it the way we did is we didn't want the Board of Zoning Adjustment to undercut us every time we approve a subdivision or did a certain way for, and I think it came up for, just by way of example, we're gonna get into this in chapter 4. I think over, Kurt, you had said at Salem Bay, because the code says no front entry garages. We approve a subdivision for Salem Bay, and then they come before the Board of Zoning Adjustment and ask for a variance to allow front entry garages on every single house. And I think what we did when we were going through those things, we're saying, we don't want everybody to backdoor the planning commission on everything. You know, it's one thing to say you can go there and get some conventional relief on something, but it's another thing to just backdoor us on everything in the code. So my point is that there are certain design issues that we want to retain to ourselves. I think under the statute, we can do that by calling them either waivers or exceptions, and maybe have a special new section of our code that talks about how every one of these waiver or exceptions should be filed as an application. And they should have to address this test, and we can design the test, you know, but it basically is a special circumstances test.
Yeah.
You know, in every
pretty
case.
common.
Yeah, that's pretty common. And maybe that's.
Especially if you have a complicated code like we have, so the planning commissions.
Yeah,
You know,
so, you know, maybe
so
that's.
maybe we just, let's take out this and, you know, maybe, you know, what do you want to do?
Well, I don't have a problem with it. I would just take out the parts that you think that are a little, like the deck size, maybe.
I would say take everything out after sight lines and then put some language in there. Unless it is exception is granted as provided by this code.
And that means even when and what Kurt said is you want, just because somebody's wanting steps down to the water, they have to file an exception for that.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that some of these things should be allowed. Paths,
We list them all, and are you okay with those?
steps, and a few of these things. I don't know which ones exactly.
I think we're starting to overcomplicate everything here, so it's just the language isn't great. But at the same time, it allows a lot of discretion. And
Well, if I was
these
Benny,
things-
I'd just say, my sightlines are impaired by that tree and all these bushes, so just take.
Yeah, that part I would get
Yeah,
it.
but Benji's point before was that that's actually not what happens. The trees are not taken down, they're pruned.
Yeah, but definition of sightlines,
A reasonable, what is a reasonable?
You know, I don't know,
Oh, that's.
but are you
you're
okay
right
with
about
a path, a step, a deck?
That's what I'm just saying. Leave
How
the
big
easy
should the
ones.
deck be? You know,
Well, I
like
think
that.
there has to be a limit on the deck. I mean.
So that, if you just put that in here, you
You can
know,
have a,
let's get rid of the reasonable sightlines and say with the thought, you know, and then following exceptions.
And then leave what I'm saying is leave those exceptions, maybe keep the
Yeah.
80 foot or something on the deck, but if we have a waiver provision, we can just reference it and then we can write that waiver provision
Yeah.
later.
yeah.
What
I-
is OCRM?
That's the.
Office of Coastal Resource Management.
Okay.
Actually, there,
And did this,
state office, now, right?
Forget what I said.
I bet that deck is 300 or 400 square feet.
Yeah,
So, I mean, if you wanna have some power over that, I think you gotta define it here. Because it's pretty general, like what does a path, you know, what is an open air? What is it, how big can the deck be? Doesn't say.
I think it needs to be
Could
bigger
be-
than 80 square
be
feet. I think
100,000 square feet?
400 square feet.
400 square feet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Residence.
And then if they want more, then we can reference, they can get that under the waiver provision or exception, whatever they write.
Well, that would be a, yeah, that would
Dock
variance anyway.
docks are administered by the state. The dock permit has to go through the state process anyway.
Well, we have to do an exception because otherwise you're not allowed to do anything.
but that was one thing that Libby
That's
wanted
certainly
us
Libby,
to,
Yeah, I
think about
we want to
addressing.
Limit those.
Yeah, we do. I mean, there's a big issue on the point right now for one. Yeah.
And
Well-
I'm a little concerned about playground equipment. What is that? And why does that need to be in the buffer?
Why are we listing out all these items?
Let's, I agree. If someone puts their swing set out in the backyard, who's gonna,
Is that a play set or is it a jump?
I don't know. I
You
I
know,
would
I mean-
delete playground equipment.
I mean, why are we putting this detail in here?
That's why I think,
Well, that's because we wanna say
Well, we
what
have
you
to,
can allow.
because there's not, you start with the, because we start with the prohibition against everything. And so we're saying, but certain things are allowed, limited, they have to be limited things. And, and I suppose somebody could put, what we think of as a 3 foot wide path, somebody suddenly makes it wide enough to drive a boat down there, and I don't know if that's what we want.
I mean, I don't know that we need yard sculpture and furniture because it's not a permanent, we're not gonna permit it. So it's, I don't know, you know what I mean? Should you really have your yard? And if you do, I mean, it can be moved.
Furniture can be.
Yeah, people are gonna just put furniture in the yard regardless.
Well, then you have to decide, you have to say the entire buffer shall be undisturbed, then we'd have to say by structures. And it's structures.
That's
and
what it says,
have-
but it says activity. It does, that's necessary to provide for a structure, but is limited for a structure or activity permitted by this. So you
so
see
just
that?
put a period after that.
You see, the entire buffer shall be undisturbed. It is limited to the necessary to provide for a structure or activity permitted by this subsection, following exceptions. I mean, it's not very long.
I don't like that language with the following exceptions. If something permitted should be listed as permitted. The following are permitted. Then
Maybe we just rewrite
whatever we
that.
think, anything besides playground.
Well,
How about,
I think I would just deal with structures, I wouldn't even worry about it, but it's regulated.
Permanent structures.
Yeah,
following structures are permanent.
Are
Permanent
bulkheads
Structure.
in number B, is that like a seawall? Is that what that means? Okay,
So I don't know that a path or a. Structure.
no, it's not. A path isn't, unless it's.
Well,
I mean, every single one of these is a disturbance to the buffer. And they're, they can vary in size, they can vary in usage, they can vary in, so let's say, okay, you can have a path through the buffer. And then somebody decides they want to make it a really substantial path so that you can ride your bike or your gator on it, you know what I mean? These are poorly defined.
Can we remove path? We say streets and sidewalks accessible to the public, so. That might take care of that.
Including steps, decks.
But yeah, steps, I think that's like our number one encroachment.
Yeah, steps are a structure.
I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. I'm kind of semi-concerned about that 400 square feet. I feel like that might be too big. I don't know if OCRM has a standard for these types of things. I don't know.
It might be 80 square feet. Might be where they got it.
I think the intention of that 80 square feet is just kind of like an observation deck. I mean, I just think about our projects, it's basically just a square, down at the
Gazebo.
bluff where you could, look at nature and look down the view like that. And all the rest of the deck would be behind the buffer, just right up against the house.
This is stuff from our old code. This is
This is
not
all
Bluff.
old code, yeah, we haven't, I haven't touched.
Does Bluffton have something similar? That maybe is better?
Well, the rest of what's been posed is coming from there,
That's what I was thinking. Maybe they have something superior.
just all superior to ours, but this section, I can check.
I've seen come in through applications a couple of times are fences in the buffer. Is that something to consider to allow, to not allow? It's not, that's something that for me, when I, get these applications and, I look to this section, fences aren't, listed, but they are typically allowed to encroach otherwise. So, and to, well, not, I mean, it's not listed here, but for regular setbacks, fences are permitted encroachment. I don't know if we want to or not include fences for the buffer.
Is it the side yard fences or like the actual rear fences?
It's typically, it's usually been the side ones to kind of, but there's been, I've had applicants come in that if we don't allow the side ones, they would build the one parallel with the marsh, which my personal opinion doesn't look as good, but
Doesn't it interfere with activity in the buffer by like animals and sea life and even erosion type issues?
it could, for sure.
Kind of why we have the buffer.
We've approached the OCRM office on that. We went over there and asked the state office about that. They said they don't have jurisdiction of anything land side from the critical zone. So they only control anything within the critical.
That past the critical line.
Right, so anything within the buffer is actually under the city's jurisdiction.
That's right.
So they were like, well, that's all on you, so,
Well, the buffer can be quite removed, I mean, where you begin your buffer is quite a ways away from the critical line by this code that we've got here.
So, we're removing some stuff. Does this look okay for right now? Do we think 400 square feet? Sounds like some people think it's a little too big. It's like basically a whole deck in your buffer. That doesn't seem right.
So there's,
Well, that's a 20 by 20 deck, so.
But should that be in the buffer or should you be? Just have a look at it now.
More I think about it, I don't know why unless we want to retain some right to ourselves, we just punt as the statute currently punts to the Board of Zoning Adjustment to allow dimensional encroachments. I mean, there's a test that's already set up by the statute, so if it says you can only have 80 feet or whatever deck, or if we want to make it 250 feet or 300 feet, somebody wants to put a bigger deck closer, encroachment, then seems to me to be a dimensional variance issue. Go to Board of Zoning Adjustment, that's what they're currently doing, right, Kurt?
Sure. And we just had. That's right. Well, that was. Got turned down. That wasn't the critical area. I think it wasn't.
But that's where they would go right now.
That's right.
Why don't we just leave it like that for right now?
Works for me.
so then we can,
Because I mean, that gives people the relief they want, unless we get around later on to writing some kind of general waiver standard for that would
Yeah, I
apply to
think we
certain
should.
designs issues.
We should do that. And we can maybe,
I agree.
we're getting into
100%.
design in 2, 3, and 4. 4 is all design, so. This might be part of that process, right? Creating a general waiver, because that's important, right?
Yep.
As you well know,
Right.
especially in Kentucky, like those that did form-based overlays, they had to change them to allow a lot of discretion to the plan commission. Otherwise, they were asking for like hundreds of variances.
Right.
So they were a lot more strict than we are. Anyway, does this look good to everybody? What we've got other than this? I think there's the question.
well, I think commensurate with what Paul just said, I think that it needs to be edited to read, the entire buffer shall be undisturbed, indigenous vegetation removal in the tidal area buffer is prohibited unless permitted by the zoning board of adjustment.
Yeah. But I think we would just, then what I was looking is possibly to give us some not just the Board of Adjustment Authority, but we haven't written that yet. So,
Yeah, I don't know that that would be right, because you're talking about vegetation removal, and that's only vegetation removal if you were to do a step, a deck.
So unless permitted, unless otherwise permitted by this code?
that's better.
Yeah, and which is, I think,
Then we don't
they
have.
were trying to say.
Okay, and then just take everything, take out A and B.
I think, yeah, unless
Well,
permitted for a structure permitted by this.
Well, basically, A and B are gonna tell you what the exceptions
Yeah,
are.
so Nick, if you could go get rid of the otherwise permitted, get rid of that.
Can you do that,
I'm right in the
Baker?
way.
No, it's
No, no, I just-
too small.
How about you do
that part?
Is prohibited and then get rid of unless otherwise permitted by the zoning board of appeals.
yeah, no, I would just say, I don't know that we,
Because that's indigenous vegetation.
the entire property shall be undisturbed, indigenous vegetation removal of the tidal buffer is prohibited. I would say unless otherwise permitted by this code,
I agree.
Well,
not
that's
by,
section is-
not by BOZA.
Yeah, that's what, yeah, I was saying to get rid of that, but that's what the next sentence is now. Five.
By this
Yeah,
code.
see, to the necessary to provide for the structure activity by this subsection, so I think that's.
And then I would, apply this code to that necessary to provide for a structural activity. I'd just say code and take the rest of that out, up to the following permanent structures are permitted, that's what I would do. And then I would leave some of those in there just because I think the steps,
About one, for example, but not limited to.
then we just say the following permanent structures are permitted. And then and I would leave the rest of that in there unless somebody wants to take one of those things out of there.
Do we, that's fine, but this 400 square feet.
I mean, for the 400 square feet, I mean,
Maybe
we
that's too
could,
big, yeah.
I mean, we could say like 80 square feet for residential and 400 for commercial use. I mean, if.
You could do that.
Yeah, I agree with Benji. I think the primary deck is gonna be on the back of your residence, out in the buffer.
I think you put up to 80 square feet, just leave the 80 square. feet.
For residential and 400 for commercial, that's what.
Sorry. For residential and 400 square feet, put for residential development.
That's really in the residential, it's sort of an observation deck, it isn't your,
It's not.
the normal decks we have.
I think that's better. That's good.
That sounds.
So do we want to let them put any kind of path and or street or sidewalk they want?
Well, there's, a lot of neighborhoods have walking paths through the.
Well, if they already have them, that's one thing, but we're talking about new here.
Well, it says, it's paths and streets and sidewalks accessible to the public.
Yeah.
So that
Getting
isn't,
rid of paths.
that isn't for,
Getting rid of the paths, so we're saying if it's accessible to the public, you can have.
yeah, well, right now it says,
We have paths, streets and sidewalks. One,
We're gonna just allow those in without. I mean, as far as ones that exist there right now, this is not gonna change that. We can't legislate out existing stuff. This is for new development. So do we want to have a free-for-all on paths, streets and sidewalks accessible to the public?
I mean,
heading into the.
I think that's nice, right? If you're having a subdivision that's on the marsh,
But like a whole
It's-
entire street.
if it
might be-
floods, it's just a 4-foot path that's gonna flood.
So on Distant Island, they put an easement on many of the lots, got an easement in front of your lot where people can walk along the waterway, which is great.
Yeah,
Okay,
But that's a private covenant, and that's something that would be approved.
should streets be?
Yeah,
I
I
don't
don't
feel
like
like
that,
the
that might be a
idea of
little much.
I don't
Maybe
either.
a path and a sidewalk might be fine.
yeah. Well, and say, you wanna say pedestrian or?
Yeah, pedestrian.
Instead of-
Yeah, pedestrian paths, yes.
Do we wanna put a width limit or
Um,
5 foot path?
yeah. So it's pedestrian paths, that's private, I guess, and then you're talking about and sidewalks, sidewalks accessible to the public is different, is that right? Is that different than a public, than a
Well, a sidewalk kind of
Private path.
implies a street,
Sidewalk.
Yeah.
street, so I think you probably should just get rid of the
I
sidewalk.
think so.
You take, just have pedestrian paths, get rid of the whole sidewalks,
Accessible to the
you
public.
get all the way through public out of there.
So what are erosion control devices? What is that?
Silt fences, for instance.
Silk fences, okay. And want them to be able to decide to do that?
And that's like,
Yeah, that you gotta do.
that's riprap too. The
Yeah,
silt
they have a
fence
lot of
is
stuff.
temporary, but like riprap rocks, you know,
Oh, we're,
more permanent.
I think that's necessary.
yeah, okay.
Right. Well, you could say temporary and or permanent erosion control devices or something.
I think staff understands what an erosion control device is.
Do we want to put,
Depends on the stuff.
we got negative impact on the natural environment or something like that?
Well, they,
Need
not,
to look at that.
yeah,
Yeah,
One thing, did we want to say decks / open air structures up to, because right now, there's no limit on decks is like we've got a common, there we go.
yeah, they did.
Alright.
And then any other elements linked to the critical area that are otherwise permitted by the CRM, yeah.
which is kind of a lot of things. Docks, boat storage, there's quite a few things that are permitted under that, just from what I can find online here. Boat lifts, loading docks, boat storage.
That's BCM now.
Fences, walls, clearing for view corridors through root removal and use of, clearing for view corridors. And special uses like private roads, sewer water crossings may be permitted if no reasonable alternative exists.
We have to distinguish between lots in the conventional zoning district and those in the transit base.
I don't think so.
Is that
I don't
necessary?
think so.
Or can we just?
I just think we say lots with bulkheads, right?
Right, exactly. But I think it should.
Well, lots with bulkheads existing at the time of adoption of the ordinance, they're probably grandfathered anyway.
Yeah.
Without even saying so, I would think.
But then those in the transit base zone would be too, right?
So if somebody wanted to install a bulkhead, let's say this is adopted, somebody wants to put a bulkhead seawall on their lot, they would have to, who would they have to ask?
State.
Okay,
I think probably B could come out entirely, couldn't it? Cause I mean, if it's. What do you think? I mean, because if they're grandfathered, no matter what we say in this code, right? If it wasn't previously regulated and now we're regulating it, then it's permitted, if it exists.
unless it was not in compliance with the code in the first place.
Yeah, then it would not have
Never.
any rights, yeah, then it's never grandfathered. So we probably should get rid of the whole thing. Then you don't need an A there either, A just becomes part of the prior sentence.
Now, do you want to talk about just docks in general, as would be suggesting, or you just want to leave it?
I don't know, the issue is what's going on in the point you said, Paul.
Well, there's a controversy, presumably, Mr. and Mrs. Gilliard have a dock, which they've now partially constructed, and they have I guess, a permit to build a dock house on the end. And their neighbor is fussing and threatening a lawsuit.
No, they sued, and it's,
Is it on
So they
the
have sued.
water end
Okay.
or the land end?
title homes sued.
Yeah, the people that own Tile Hill next door, and so. But you know, I'm just guessing it was a lawfully permitted dock. You know, so they've gone to the state, they got a permit.
For the dock, and now they want to add a.
Well, no, I think it probably included that, you know.
Even with the HRG.
Then it went to the HRB,
What
right?
did they do?
And the HRB approved it. So I mean,
They still sued.
So where on the
Yeah.
dock is the dock house? Is it on
Well,
the
it'd be on the
land side
end
or
of
the
the-
far end?
no, it would be on the end of the pier, I believe,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Isn't there one there now?
Well, so the neighbor that's suing has one, but he doesn't want his neighbor to
Oh.
have one.
I thought there was one out there.
And then there's another one next door that belongs to Bill Kennedy that's been there forever and ever and ever. So, I don't know.
When you're facing the water from the tidal home, there's a dock with a place on it that's kind of fallen, looks like it's been there 100
That's
years.
Kennedy's on the left,
And that's
that's on
the one
the
that's-
north side, yeah.
Kind of falling down.
This one is
That's
on,
okay to fall down.
this one's on the
Can't have a
south
new
side.
one.
Okay.
So I think that Libby makes a very good point in terms of, you know, talking about lengths of docks and all. And crossing over a little, you know, you gotta cross over a little. What would be a stream at high tide to get to the next marsh to then get out to deep water. I mean, it gets to the point where it's sort of absurd, you know, and it is an eyesore. So there should be some regulation as to length, it seems to me. You know, some properties are fortunate and they can go 10 feet and they're in deep water, others. I just don't think it makes sense for the city to permit 400-yard long docks. That's just.
Just because, I think your point being is that if you happen to have bought a property where it only takes you, 100 feet to get to the water, and the other guy has a property might take you 400 or 500 or 600, how long do we allow those things? Do we allow them to go, forever into the water?
Whatever the state permits for.
Whatever, you're just saying, whatever the state permits?
And so, but even sort of near your house, you've got some that project out there and they don't go anywhere really, except on high tide.
That's right.
They just poke out there and you can't use them except, 6 hours out of the day.
That's right.
So there's gotta be some reasonable limit on,
Does the state have a limit on it,
length of
Kurt? Is that
dock.
what you're saying? What did you say about the state?
We let the state, regulate it, so that's where we're at.
Well,
So what do you, what's your,
However, water-oriented facilities are, in section chapter 2.5.3. So there could be maybe a discussion for, chapter 2, so I think that's.
She has hers in chapter 4. She refers to the state as the length of docks being up to 1,000 feet.
Yeah, so ours are in chapter 2 and chapter 3, so maybe this is a discussion that we can have.
that we hold that?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm going.
Yeah, I know that she's, just thinking about this. I don't know that the zoning shopping really matters, but I think it's more just is this a nuisance or not? So-
Well, we've come up with that. They do so many shopping. We had something go from the county to the city for an individual lot, just because the county would not allow a dock to be put in under their code and the city allows it. So there's shopping being done. That was a couple of years ago, I think.
so Kurt, do you know whether the county standards?
She adopts the county
Okay.
standards, but again, in our code, it's in chapter 2 and it's in chapter 2.
But are the county standards more stringent or less stringent than the?
Apparently, they're more stringent.
Yeah.
We don't have anything. I was looking up our code. We don't have,
whatever the state.
we don't have a limit.
allows.
So,
State-
like Paul was
state's
saying,
pretty liberal.
you could do 1,000 feet, and we don't care.
Well,
The state permits it, we'll permit it.
Maybe we do want to have consistency in the county.
Uh, I don't know, I think we should look at it,
Yeah, let's just wait till
but
we
let's
get
wait
to.
till we get to there.
So wait till we get to
Yeah.
chapter 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're really restricting it. You know, you have to have a minimum of 250 feet of frontage along Title Creek to even qualify for private dock. You know, they've got a lot of extra restrictions that we just don't have.
That's the chapter 2.
That's chapter 2.
We kind of jumped over to 8.2. Was there anything anybody had in, on the first page, page 1, 8.1?
Not to nitpick, but I mean, does the buffer really mitigate the impact of tropical storms and hurricanes?
How's that?
It
Does it?
does.
Yeah.
It does, okay,
Because it'll kind of slow down the flooding.
okay,
I think
all right.
the idea.
The only comment I had was on 8.2.1. On that first sentence. We don't say, we don't do waterways, it just says marsh edge. So are we protecting waterways as well as marsh edges?
Probably are here.
I would think we would.
So marsh edge and waterways.
Yeah.
Does the city have jurisdiction over waterways?
No,
But it's to preserve the native landscape along.
yeah,
It
it's,
has jurisdiction of the
has-
land
yes.
next to the waterways.
right,
Which would be the edge?
Shoreline.
I think you're out preserving the middle of where the boats are going.
yeah, shoreline would be good too.
Shorelines.
Sure.
Anybody got anything else on page 1?
Well, yeah,
Well,
the
yeah,
size. I mean, I mean, that's kind of a really big thing.
what,
Well,
50 feet, 30 feet?
well, right now, it's 30 feet for transit-based districts and conventional districts, 50 feet. Libby said that, I think she said that both of those are less than what the county requires. And in some instances, more than what the county requires. So. do we
Well,
want-
I mean, I do think we have to kind of differentiate between us and the county.
Well, I'm not saying we have to go by the county, but,
Yeah.
you know, I'm just saying that, you know, do we want to differentiate between transect and conventional, number one? And number two, what limits do we want? Do we want 50 everywhere, which is what this proposed amendment is?
I know if you get out into, some of the developments, they're pretty much all based on 25 to 30 feet now. And the lots are not really, really deep. The, facilities that are on them.
You're gonna, 50 feet is, you're correct, is gonna wind up, if you've got existing properties, you're gonna wind up in some cases. You know, you basically got a buffer. You know, all the way from the critical line up to your house almost.
Yeah.
Unless there's already something there,
Well, right.
you know, so
But if you
somebody
want to
has
add
to
on to your
know.
house, you
Yeah.
want to add on to your house or. You know. I don't know, we've got a big problem now with 30 feet. 30 and 50, is that do we have a big problem? I don't know. I mean, what's driving the increase? I don't know that there's a big problem on that.
Well, the rest of the codes go into a 50-foot like wetland buffer, so.
Well, I
It's going, if we agree that it's
Or a
going there.
100-foot wetland.
Yeah, I mean,
100-foot wetland.
Well, I don't agree with 100. I think that's just too much, but you know, we can live with 50, right? I guess.
for everybody, or do we want 30 to remain the case in the transect based?
And this is a critical area,
Oh, okay,
specifically with wetland.
well, still,
I personally think 30 is fine, that's just fine.
In the transect,
I think so, I mean. 50 just feels unnecessarily restrictive, but that's just my.
I mean, in the transect, which is the older parts of the city, really, all that area is probably cleared right up to the critical line anyway.
The only conventional
Yeah,
district
right,
we have are
and
like
so-
IC.
Where really, our bigger concern is gonna be about new subdivisions and stuff like that. When somebody comes through in Salem Bay or something like that, we want them to stay out of that area.
So this room from those partition doors right there to this wall is about 30 feet. I mean, that seems, you know, from the critical line, that seems like a pretty reasonable. setup.
In a transect district.
And it'll be, it'll be kind of strange, because there's really not much lots left in the transect on the water.
Right.
Property. And if you do have like a new house, it would be kind of weird to have that house set back and everybody else is up front, on the water. So
Well,
I'm personally okay with the 30 feet as
Yeah,
well.
Habersham is, they're dealing with lot sizes that if you go more than 30 feet, you're gonna be taking out a lot of that developable, area. The lots are gonna start to get real short.
Exactly.
And right now, 30 feet seems like it works pretty well for them right now.
That's, sounds like I heard. 30,
30 feet.
three of, I
30
haven't heard from
transect.
Kim,
30 for transect.
Bill, or, Bill.
I mean,
I'm
that's
just saying
just,
30 for transect.
I think 30 is all right.
Okay, so it sounds like we got a
I
majority.
heard no argument to the
Put back to
contrary, really. I mean, 30.
30.
Yeah, okay.
But the one thing I,
For the others, is that right?
the one thing I wanna add here, or I guess open up the discussion is, since for PUD zoned areas,
Yeah, we are, it's 5
We're getting rid of
but a lot of PUDs don't have language that has any, that doesn't even talk about critical area buffers. So in those cases, does this still apply? Are they exempt?
Well, that's an issue that we've, I think, 4 times now, I've requested the legal opinions. The supposed legal opinions that have not been provided that say we can regulate PUDs on these, and I still haven't seen them. We asked, you told us early on that there was when you first introduced it, there was an opinion from Bluffton and from our own Beaufort city attorney. And I really think it would benefit us to have those legal opinions.
PUDs, yeah, I mean, PUDs are, whatever's in the
Well,
PUD.
PUDs and development agreements, they're two, kind of sacrosanct areas apparently. If we can impose restrictions on them according to those legal opinions, which we haven't seen yet, then we may want to do that. But without seeing those, I hesitate to
Yeah.
get involved with that. I think it's important, but
it's maybe not.
What were you saying?
Oh, I just thought that we should now.
so
Well, yeah,
leave no regulation of those.
We don't know.
Well, we don't know, but I mean, this would be the time
Well, and
to address.
it would be good to see the legal opinion on development agreement sites. So for example, I was just reviewing the statute again today, and the way that the statute that was adopted back, I think in the 90s says, up to 250 acres or something. It just says a 5-year vesting period. So I'm just curious how you get 25 years of vesting in a statute that says 5 years. So I would be nice to just hear the legal opinion on all of that.
Okay, I can send that on, I apologize.
No, that's all right, just, we got other
I think-
things going on, but.
I think just with the PUD, like. The office, OCRM, next point, is still gonna have a line. So, like, PUD,
But the SCRI line is the critical line,
yeah,
not the buffer.
yeah, I know, but. I'm just saying, like,
So PUD would have a 0 buffer then?
Well, would they have their regular rear setback? But they don't have a buffer, yeah, you're.
Well, that's the other thing, PUD can have
Whatever.
whatever
setback.
setbacks they want. So,
Yeah, I mean,
Well, I mean, if you wanna add one, I guess.
Probably should.
I can see if the attorney likes this one.
Well,
Could say 30 foot, just say transect and or POD districts. There you go.
You can add it in there and see what they say. That'll certainly prompt them to respond, won't
get their
it?
answer.
Let's do it.
Actually, that's really
Put it in
good.
there.
Well, if you read the rest of it, that's what Bluffton's done with the whole wetland ordinances. They basically said that the health and safety of the wetlands and critical areas are more important than whatever was approved by PDS and development. I guess they adopted it, and I'm
Well,
sure
they adopted
they'll
it.
probably get sued, but we'll see.
So I think we wanna, without even looking into the legal authority for such a position, I don't think we want to set up the city for a lawsuit. So
Yeah.
that's why I wanna see the opinions.
But that is.
But
I
we
mean,
gotta
that
do
is-
it before the city.
That is
council
the whole
adopts
thing
it.
that we're doing here, is we're saying that even if you. Basically, even if you have a prior agreement.
No, you guys are, I was just observing, you guys are great.
Okay.
I don't wanna slow you down or stop you, keep going. Bye, everyone.
I mean, it would be unusual, it seems to me, that a development within a PUD is gonna, get that close to the critical line anyway.
Well, we'll just give it a shot. I mean, I don't see why not, but that is what we're doing with the other sections, so we might as well. That's a good point. We really don't have much left. I got.
For the record, the young lady who just left was, Ashley Goodrich, from BJWSA.
Okay, what is that?
Oh,
Yes.
Okay,
Uh,
hour and 45 minutes in, and we're done with page 1 of.
I did it. At least time for a break and a donut.
so we did 8.2.3. I got one at 8.3.1.
Oh, of course you do.
Of course I can, I mean, just under E, where it says minimize the total volume of surface water. I had a lot of experience with stormwater management, and I don't think we regulate volume, we regulate impacts. And I mean, usually, for example, detention deals with controlling the rate of runoff, because anytime if I put so much as that chair in an empty field, I'm gonna have more volume of runoff. Any kind of impervious surface. So I just want to change the impact.
That's an existing section.
I know it is, but but we just went through existing stuff and we addressed
That's
it.
fine.
I think it was probably always wrong. I would just change the word impact. Unless you tell me that we are regulating volume, I don't think we are.
I agree, impact is a better word.
I mean, impact. Depends on volume, but I
Sure.
do.
It's just that we don't,
Yeah.
nobody ever regulates volume because you can't. You can regulate the rates of runoff.
Rate and everything else.
Would that apply to C as well, minimize the impacts in stormwater runoff from new development?
Minimize the increases in stormwater. Well, we are minimizing increases, the effective increases is what you're doing.
So the
Minimize the effective increases.
Impact of increase.
Yeah, effective increase maybe there, effects of increases.
There you go.
Or you could put in minimize impacts again, I don't care. How to do it.
Kind of like effects of.
All right.
Any other changes on page 2? Seeing none, we'll go to page 3.
Well, I did have one question on the bottom of page 2 of the page. I'm not really sure what this means. The language I'm wondering about is in the last 2 lines, and supports resilience efforts in anticipation of more frequent and severe weather events, as well as documented and protected sea level rise procedures, protect, and so forth. To me, that is not really very specific, and I'm not sure exactly what it means, and maybe you can enlighten us.
Well, I think it's the buzzword, right? You know, there's all these resilience plans and then, you know, sea level rise, right? And that's what it's basically a purpose section that's basically saying we're trying to, you know, get ahead of the fact that, you know, in 20 years, I think we'll all be here.
Well, is it a setup for you know, imposing regulation to the detriment of developers?
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Everything in the code is.
That's true, but it sounds like a, you know, this goes right to the hot button issue.
But if it wasn't, then what job would you have, Bill?
No, it's all right. No,
Everything in it would just be, you'd just be handling the civil actions from.
yeah, a long time ago, you and I talked about the fact of trying to figure out how to develop in a community without any regulations is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Because when you're used to dealing with a regulatory environment, somebody says, well, this community doesn't have any planning or zoning, you can just design whatever you want, and just about pull your hair out. It's like, I can do anything.
That comes down to money. That comes down to money.
I mean, do you wanna just remove it?
I-
To,
I'd leave it, it's a. I didn't invent the resiliency word, but it does seem to be.
it's a buzzword. right?
Well, it is a political statement, there's no doubt about it.
Well, let's
I mean, I think it
say.
is like one of the most endangered areas in the entire East Coast of Puerto Rico.
Well,
Yeah, we are.
We're like in literally like the top 5 county or something. Supposed to be in 50 years, all of it's supposed to go away. So,
I'm glad I live in elevation 24 or whatever it is. You can't get me for a while.
How beautiful.
so what if we changed it a little bit and said, take out the first 2 words? Just say, protect wetlands and wetland buffer areas from the encroachment, blah, blah, blah. All the way down to quality management plans, period. And take out the rest of it. I think it's less incendiary. I think it accomplishes the, you know, says basically the same thing. You know, if it's just a purpose statement, why do we have to get political about it?
fine with me.
And then
You're not gonna like the next sentence, because that's all about, you know, EV charging, and I'm just. And that's, so, sorry, is not in conflict to which the city does not prevent the development of form. So then that's,
so this
then it
is,
says,
so wait a minute.
it shall
Um,
apply to the, and this is
It's
something that.
saying that, but is that really what we mean?
They adopted it, and that, I was informed of that, and
So this looks to me like somebody could argue in court, for example, that because of this language, no regulations can affect an existing.
I'd just take it out because, I mean, if in fact the development agreement prohibits, you know, further regulation, it prohibits it, but I think you're right, just leave it out.
Oh, good.
It just causes, you know.
Yeah.
So take out I.
Yeah, we don't have to get into that right now.
no pride of authorship here.
And I would take out J as well.
Really? Oh, the
Yes.
development, that's right, any development that is subject, oh, yeah. Yeah, probably so, yeah.
And then I don't think we need K either.
Yeah, I don't think you, yeah, right, all 3 of those.
Yeah.
Then we got another one coming up.
Yeah.
I have a
Yeah, I would take,
modification to L, but
I would take it out, but what's your modification?
well, it kind of goes along with it, though. It says application of this code to any development or submittal substantial changes in the development.
I think we just take them all, I think that somebody with a development agreement got Boston and put all those in there.
Well, it's saying that you can, you know. It's saying that shall apply to any development is subject to, it's saying that this shall apply to anything. It's
Substantial change in development effects have occurred since the time the development agreement was signed, which changes if not addressed in this article was a threat. I don't know what that
So
was
that, I
really
think
saying.
what that means is the
Saying that
development
you
agreements
have
are
to-
threats to
Yeah,
the environment.
that's right.
So I think you take it out.
I think we just have to take it out. Yeah.
So the goal, I think, for them is to say, you got a development agreement, well, you still have to do a buffer.
Exactly, and if we're gonna say that, let's say it in another section instead of all this lingo in here that's kind of contradictory.
Applicability section?
Well, I don't know if we're even gonna do it, because I would like to see those legal opinions.
Okay.
But, and
You've already set it up for that to happen, so that's, hopefully we'll get that legal opinion. Whether or not you can regulate a PUD or something that's already under a development agreement.
Bluffton seems to think they can, and again, they're like 95%. So
give us your legal opinion, Bluffton. Let's see, and, you know,
Yeah, it will be interesting.
just right on. Well, I think so.
yes, you know.
Well, L is kind of, I don't know, the way I read it, it's antithetical to protecting the development agreement.
Yeah, it's not, yeah, that's what I'm saying, but this is saying though.
And that's why I wrote what I did in implementation of this code to any development or substantial changes in development impacts have occurred since the time of the development agreements were signed, which changes, if not addressed in this article, would pose a threat to health, safety, and welfare.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that without the legal basis. And, you know, if we see the legal opinions and we want to put a purpose statement back in saying, oh, you know, too bad, if you have a development agreement, we're not gonna honor it here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see where this could apply with some certain things, you know, right, but.
Well, but you're going back to the health, safety, and welfare clause, which stands up against anything.
Right, but I don't see the point in saying, you know, specifying development agreements and giving some sort of fodder for arguments that, you know, the city's anti-development, they're doing anything and everything they can in order to interfere with these vested rights under development agreements. I think this points a spotlight at a, you know, some people believe that development agreements are bad. I'm not one of them, but there are people who have that opinion. And so you're right, health, safety, and welfare is always gonna trump things. We don't need to make a big deal about it with development agreements in the code, because I think it's an invitation to a lawsuit. My opinion.
We can get an opinion on it, you know, I think.
I see what you're saying. I just think it holds their feet to the fire a little bit, just a little bit.
But if we don't have to, why do that? Why make that?
Well, there's the other sections of the code, that's why I put that part in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is saying, they're basically saying, if you have a development agreement, this is, Nick was talking about, you know, you have to still meet these standards, that's what it's Bluffton not doing. Whereas, you know, right now, they're gonna say, you know, I don't have to do anything really, whatever my development agreement says.
I have a development agreement.
That's right.
And
A development, I mean, under the statute, the purpose of a development agreement was simply, it was to say that as of X date, you know, obviously when it's approved, it's in compliance with everything. And then what it tried to do is give these things an extraordinarily long vesting period. Now, the statute sets out, you know, how long that vesting period is dependent on the size of the development. And so the idea is that during that period of vesting, new regulations can't apply. that would affect that development, you know, that would require a greater setback or things of that kind.
Well, went
Um,
far beyond that, Bill, in South Carolina. It basically
So I'm talking
said
about the
everything.
statute, I'm talking about the statute in South
Yeah, but
Carolina.
what got approved for development agreements was, you know,
Now-
we had really good attorneys that basically said everything, you know, like how it's approved, you know, what requirements, whether you have to pay impact fees, whether they.
Well, some of the, and that's part of what I'm sort of getting at, some of these development agreements might have gone beyond what the statute authorized. And so and I'm not even sure that some of these things that we think are vested, maybe they've already run, I don't know. So I think that's why we'd like to see what this supposed legal opinion is out there. You know, I'd love to see what some of these development agreements that are existing in Beaufort actually say. I've read some other development agreements that have been approved by the county council recently or proposed. So I know what, you know, people are putting in them, but I'm just curious about the ones that we've been sort of confronted with and are being, you know,
I can give them to
You
you.
know what, it would be helpful, Kurt, to have a list of existing development agreements in the city of Beaufort. And also ones in potential annexation areas in the county.
But at least mostly right now, the easiest ones for you are, you know, those that are existing and supposedly in force and effect. It would be, I think we'd all be interested in seeing those. I don't know how big a deal that is for Julie to copy those, or at least make one available we can read online or something.
Yeah, I mean, she can provide us a link or something.
I mean, they're public documents, so, yeah, I can send them.
Do you have any idea, as you sit here right now, how many of you are talking about?
Well, the big ones are the airport junction, Penwood Park, lower Upper King Island, urban properties and Houston Island.
All the.
That used to plantation.
Everything that a trask owns.
Pretty much what's.
You're gonna get in trouble just being in a meeting asking the question. No.
No, I mean, they did what they did in the day, and I mean, they're fine. I'm a proponent of PUDs. I worked on one in Broad Street, and that's a really nice little neighborhood down there. So I think PUDs are great.
No, I do too. I don't have any problem with them. I don't know why we suddenly did.
I think staff,
Somebody had. a
maybe
problem with it.
even prior staff,
Well,
and really like PUD.
that's kind of a nationwide thing, as you know. Bill. Maybe they're
Yeah.
still doing local. But I
No,
think
I've got some.
I think it's because, not to keep picking on you, but I think it's because people like you are a lot smarter than people like me and, and they, I mean, they were a lot smarter than the cities or the jurisdictions and they, you know, it was an imbalance. So, and also the codes have changed a lot, right? They've modernized. So you don't have the issues with mixed uses and stuff like that. But if you look at all the development agreements I've ever seen, they're always weighted toward, like, heavily weighted towards the developer, not the city. Always, like,
Well, but the city approves them, or the county
city
approves them,
approves
so
them,
it's not as though they're imposed on them,
yeah.
they
of course.
reviewed everything in them.
Sure.
But, you know, if there's a loophole in the agreement where they don't cover something, you know, like a critical buffer area, and then we write a new code provision regarding one, it's possible that our critical buffer area might apply,
That makes sense.
whereas they never even thought
It's
about
not
it.
stated in
makes
the
sense.
PUD, it should.
Yeah,
If it's silent, if it's the development agreement silent on it, then probably you're right.
Yeah, that's how I've always seen it.
So there may not be a need for incendiary language in the code regarding development agreements.
that's possible, yeah.
It's possible, I don't think ours had anything about it critical, but they do have some environmental.
I've approved a lot of PUDs in the 50 years that I've been doing this stuff. But we've always had a sunset.
Yeah, everything needs to have some level of sunset,
Without that,
just, yeah.
without that, you get what we got now.
What we got now.
What we got now is stuff sitting out there that.
Seems to go on forever.
Goes on forever and everything around it, all your, utilities have completely changed or non-existent and development around those areas
I mean,
is completely changed.
it's one thing to require a developer to get started in a certain period of time, and I'm all for giving them more time than maybe people think, just because it takes a long time to get, you know, a lot of the infrastructure that, you know, we don't even talk about here, and the financing, and then the economy comes and goes, and interest rates and stuff, but it's another thing to not do anything forever. You know, 25 years.
Yeah.
So I think the original idea was, let's give somebody with a big development 25 years for, just by way of example, 10 years or whatever it is. You know, to get somewhere along the line or get finished or something, but to not even get started for several
Well,
decades.
it's a big thing to say, because I know, Hardyville has like 40,000 permitted. Vested development in a development agreement lots. And that's why they're building all the sewer infrastructure down there, because they literally, one council decided, you know, or two councils decided we want development in Hardyville. And just handed out development agreements to every single site, but if they're infrastructure or not, where there was no infrastructure. And now the whole city is basically one big development agreement that.
Right.
Now, when they finish that East Argent loop into Argent Boulevard, look out.
Yeah, exactly, and so.
Yeah, on a 2-lane road, Argent Boulevard, you know, you get, there's a fender bender, never gonna get to your airport. You know,
No, Ori
That's
County,
what the tailgaters-
Ori County University program used to work, you know, international paper in Burroughs and Chapin. A lot of books written about them, but, you know, they had these giant swaths of land, international paper, just giant swaths. I mean, we're talking, you know, Ori County is like the biggest, it's as big as Rhode Island. I mean, it's huge. They basically entitled, you know, in the early 2000s and late 2000s, like just tens of thousands of acres. And now you see what it looks like without any idea of infrastructure,
Right.
roads or anything at all. Now you see the result of that. So it's getting built. They've had to build, you know, infrastructure the county has to, but it's not adequate. They've just got just development everywhere and everywhere you can see, because it was all entitled, invested through development agreement.
Okay, let's move on. Are we taking L out or are we leaving it in?
We were gonna check it against the legal opinion. Right.
So I say take it out with a parking lot note,
Yeah, an asterisk.
Christopher.
I'm not.
Who's parking lot?
Who's the parking
Who's
lot?
the parking lot?
Parking lot monitor.
That's a great question, or I can write a note.
Yeah, put a note saying,
Right.
you know, after we see legal opinion, consider putting this back in.
Can we get rid of that expression parking lot maybe?
Yeah.
And that's. We're talking about parking lots?
She's adding up the party.
Okay, moving on to 832.
Yeah, there's something there about that sentence isn't working,
Yeah,
too many verbs there. And I don't know if the second one, the shall is supposed to be an and.
Yeah, this is,
I think it's the Southern Stormwater Management is applicable for all development, redevelopment and major substantial improvement. And
I think,
Shall provide-
it's period.
After improvement? Or
Right? I
after?
mean, why does it
development?
have to go on with all that language? The Soloco manual says what it says.
well, the only thing I did was I added into that in progress development.
Well, wait a minute. You don't want it applicable to proposed, or you, what?
No. Added into that in progress development, comma, proposed development, comma,
Oh, I see, okay.
redevelopment.
And then you're just saying stop after improvement and take the rest of it out, Paul, you said, because.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, the Soloco, if we're going by the Soloco manual that we're gonna identify clearly, then that's what it is. That's what's applicable.
And this is where it should be identified.
Yeah.
So whatever Soloco meant.
He's just saying, why do we need a description of it, is what you're saying, which is after the word shall provide, just tells you what's in the manual, right? And
I mean, I just think.
Yeah, I took that from, I think, another jurisdictions, you know, where, that's, I was looking how they.
I mean,
For the Soloco.
again, I think it's sort of a. I mean, we know what it says. The engineers know what it says.
all right, then I
So we're taking everything out after substantial improvement
That's what
I
I
guess
think.
it is, yeah.
and then adding Mike's language after the word all in progress.
Yeah.
You wanna add the Bluffton version here? Or the one?
Well, you're gonna-
You're gonna let us know what
Yeah,
version.
that's gonna have to be added specifically, yes.
Without the word Boston,
You're right.
Yeah.
Whatever.
yeah, whatever version that
I'll
is.
just find that tomorrow.
Identify the specific version and state that there's a link on the Beaufort website to that version. So people can find that version.
Right,
Oh, it's gotta be dated too.
right,
Well, I
That's
mean,
right.
right,
yeah, that can be part of the identification.
yeah.
Anybody have anything else? I have. I'm sorry, I hadn't heard this word before. About 5 sentences down, it says, or number 2, projects that are exclusively for agricultural. And then there's this,
I think that's tree removal, isn't it? So I think that's tree,
Silvan would be trees.
I think it's tree,
They're very.
tree harvesting, what it is. If I'm not mistaken.
Well, agriculture is you're growing crops. Silviculture is you're growing trees.
Yeah.
For the purpose
Okay.
of
Right.
harvesting.
The store paper. Silvan, so he's a derivation of the word.
Right,
okay,
Did you take Latin in?
Yes.
So did I, but you remember a lot more than I do.
Classical education comes in
Well,
every once in a while.
I just wanted the education from you.
Yeah.
There you go. You're up to
Okay,
speed now.
anybody on page 3 other than that?
Well, my only comment was right there in the first line, which says any maintenance, alteration, renewal, or improvement. I was just gonna say as previously, or just take out as and put previously approved, right?
Take, number 1, C1. So, improvement previously approved, is that what you're suggesting? Mark?
That's what I'm,
any maintenance on it.
yeah. Previously approved by the city.
No, that's why previous,
Should
wait. or-
keep as.
Or we can maybe just take out as and just say improvement approved by the city.
Yeah, I think it's fine the way it is.
Okay.
I have a question on this letter B sentence. It just seems to be hanging out there. I don't know. I personally do not understand what they're getting at with that one sentence. Any disturbance within wetland.
That's the applicability, so any disturbance.
Where's
It's applicable if there's someone tries to disturb a buffer area or a wetland, this is what.
Okay, so that's what that,
So maybe we need this code applies to any disturbance,
something like that.
yeah. It's kind of not a complete sentence.
Yeah.
This section, maybe, this section. That's.
Do you also want to include the 5,000 square foot threshold that's where it applies, is that where the Soloco applies, anything? Anything over 5,000 square feet?
I would,
Disturbed area?
I would stick with just the logo.
Well, I don't even explain that 5,000 thing, I don't really
That's the
understand.
trigger where that kicks in. So
5,000
any-
what?
Any land disturbance by development or whatever you're doing on your property. You have to abide by Soloco stormwater requirements.
If the variance
If
is,
you're, right, if
5,000
you're at
square
or
feet.
higher than 5,000 square feet of disturbance.
well, how is the city applying it now? Are you using that 5,000 square feet?
I think it would be best just to leave it as a logo. Because that could change.
Does the Soloco manual have the 5,000 foot trigger? And you're right, it could change in the future.
So that way, if you just change the regulation, then you don't have to change the ordinance.
Okay, moving on to page 4. Anybody?
Let me, before we, this kind of is at the bottom of page 3 going on to 4. So it's, well, you're moving too fast for me, Mike, I'm an old lady. Work by governmental agencies or property owners required to mitigate emergency flooding conditions. If possible, emergency work should be approved by appointed officials, et cetera. I'm just wondering, does that have any relationship to that thing you were talking about, Paul, about, mowing the marsh and, doing that kind of stuff? I mean, is the city supposed to be like granted just complete ability to?
Well,
No, the city's supposed to abide by its own regulations.
this just says as required to mitigate emergency flooding, that's all it says. It's not just general work. It's work by agencies or property owners required to mitigate emergency flooding conditions.
Okay, but what is that like flooding in the future from a hurricane or flooding from flooding that has occurred already, or what is that?
Emergency flooding.
I just heard the flooding was,
Well, so,
today or yesterday. It rained this morning.
but
What's that?
you need permission to do that.
I mean, on King Street down on the point, does that mean, when the storm, if it gets covered up with palmetto frogs, and, some guy goes out there and uncovers it and lets it drain out? I mean, people just tend to do the right thing. I mean, what
Right.
emergency action are we talking about? I mean,
Uh-huh.
and then it goes on the next page, it says property owners will stabilize the site of the emergency within 60 days or as soon as reasonable following the end of the emergency. I don't even know what all this stuff means. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't either.
I go out and clean the grates.
I
On Washington.
I clean my bridge too.
Bless you both. Braving the raccoons coming out of
Yeah,
it.
ready to yeah, they don't come out of hiding.
So,
Yeah, you make a good point. It's hard to know what exactly what,
All they're trying to say.
I guess,
I mean, is they trying to put some burden on the property owner for, doing the right thing? I mean, I have no idea what that language means.
maybe it's better to go away, 'cause I think somebody was trying to just say in emergency situations, it's every man for himself, but you gotta, if you screw something up, you gotta fix it. That's what they're saying.
maybe we could
But I
say
think
something like,
I guess that's what they're saying.
How about we just leave the first sentence?
Yeah, maybe leave that, and take the rest out.
The
So-
owners are required to mitigate.
so take out everything after the word relief in the first line on page 4. Is that what you're saying?
I just had to keep the first sentence.
I think that's the
After the
first
word,
sentence.
after the word conditions. Take it out is what he's
Take
saying.
everything out.
Okay, after conditions, okay.
Is that like, could it be like when, like somebody is putting around sandbags around their property?
Well, it might be exactly it. That might be what you're talking about, is you don't leave the sandbags there for the rest of the time, as some property owners do.
There you go.
Cause you do see them, there's some sandbags that never seem to be.
Yeah, they're heavy, in particular.
They are very heavy, especially when they're wet. I think that may be what they're talking about. there.
So maybe we can say, as long as emergency conditions persist or something like that.
I'm just,
Or as long as emergency conditions persist.
But, really, I think leaving it after conditions is probably fine.
yeah, I would just
Persist, yeah.
end it
Let's
out.
just say this, so we're required to mitigate flooding conditions or as long as emergency conditions persist.
But I bet you anything, that's what it's referring to, is the sandbags that people never pick up.
Probably.
All right, we're good
We
with
need the
that.
word "are" after the word "owners." Work by
No,
property
we're not.
property
No, we
are
we don't.
required.
No, we don't need that. Because it's saying that work by, they're required to mitigate emergency flooding is allowed essentially, not they have to do it.
Oh, okay. I think- All right.
Sorry.
Okay, moving to page 4.
Okay, number 5, Why would it only apply to installation of nature trails or previous pedestrian access paths no greater than 4 feet in width?
Well, this is an exception.
Is an exception.
Well, it doesn't say this is an exception.
Yeah, it does.
Exemption.
Oh, exemptions, it does, okay, never mind, I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay, installation, okay.
Anything else on page 4?
Is that the same path that we were talking about earlier? That was 5 feet or?
Yeah, you might want to move it to 5 feet.
Which is pretty small.
Sure is.
I do it 4 feet 6 inches.
Oh, you know what, in number 11, it says, under maintenance of existing water control devices, it says, provided that the structure is not degraded as defined herein. I couldn't find where it's defined.
Yeah, let's just get rid of that.
Is not defined anywhere, so I can,
Let's just get rid of after structures,
They're provided,
yeah.
just put after structures. And that's fine.
so am I understanding that this whole table is scratched out?
Yep.
Okay,
We will move on to page 6.
No, I think you need to put that back and then.
Now we're on page 6E.
I will say it's really interesting that they came up with like a page of stormwater regulations for the entire system. It's not a lot there. So, not a lot there.
so where did this didn't come from Bluffton, that, or wait,
What's that?
this was the old code, it didn't say anything
Or the,
that you're scratching out.
yeah,
Okay, all
that
right,
was our stormwater manual,
okay, all right,
The whole thing.
the whole thing.
okay.
So it was not a lot. Basically, even though stormwater seems to be the #1 issue here, it was basically just saying we're not really gonna regulate it, so that's.
I don't know if we need that irrigation thing in
I don't
there,
either.
because nobody, I mean, most of us aren't using rainwater. I mean, it's probably a good idea if you could figure out how to do it. You're using a well,
Well, that's a whole lot different.
that's rainwater.
Not trying to irrigate out of the barrel.
Well, I mean, a lot of people, if you have a well, people do use wells
Yeah,
because of the expense of using city water.
But that's not,
but that's not what they're talking about. I think you get rid of that.
Well, are they, I mean, do they
He's
think
talking about
rainwater
rain
is
barrels.
better to flow into the marsh than,
Well, he's just talking about, we're just saying,
Sustainability thing.
okay,
it's a,
okay, moving on to 833 standards.
so we used that same sentence earlier,
so we're
so.
taking irrigation out.
Yeah,
I don't know why we have to repeat what
Right.
manual we're referring to. It's already stated.
Exactly. I think that comes out, because we just stated it in 8.3.2, right?
That's right.
Just the whole section.
So I guess you,
So is this a bunch of stuff from the manual? Is that what 8.3.3 is?
Well, it's just basically a repeat that we're gonna rely on the Soloco manual.
Well, A is,
that's what we just said.
okay, so you're only
comes
talking
out.
about A, okay.
Yeah. A comes out because we just already said it at 8.3.2.
All right, then that wetland standard should become 8.3.
Or if you can leave this section intentionally left blank, we decide to put dots.
Yeah, now.
Or development agreements.
so does that have wetlands delineation in it?
Are you on 8.3.4 now?
Well,
Yeah,
the
I
entire,
was asking, they were saying get rid of all of 833.
Right, but
I'll
then,
just get rid of A of 8.33.
and then the next section is 8.3.4. That confused me as well because of the different fonts.
well, 8.3.3 really becomes wetland standards.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just renumber.
So the
renumber
Okay.
before.
Yeah.
That should be.
So we are removing this one.
Yeah.
Is it easier to renumber than to leave the section blank?
I think it's easier just to.
Well, especially since this is all new, so that does make sense, okay.
They're really moving now.
And
We're cooking.
now the numbering, it gets really under a little b, it gets really messed up, the
Yes.
lettering and numbering.
Yes,
And I think we need to just. I think that 1 is okay, 2 is okay, and then under 2, I think it's a little A with parentheses around it, I guess. And then B, C, and then when it gets to 3, I don't know if that's what that is, I don't know if that's a new 3, because it's got parentheses around it, I think it's a 3 without the parentheses, I think.
And it really helps to use indentation to differentiate these
Yeah.
things instead of having them all on the
And-
margin.
And then if that 3 is actually a real 3 without the parentheses.
I think it is a real,
Huh?
it needs a title,
Then,
it should be.
then there's no A under it,
Maybe it should be D
huh?
and then I's.
Well. So is the where it says the land disturbance or activity proposed, that's a number 3, just like 2 above. without
Yeah, maybe
parentheses.
not. It seems like it's an exception, isn't it? Accessory.
Well, I don't know what it is,
Does not increase, that's an exception, so it should be D.
so then that should be a D?
Yeah.
Okay, well then if that's a D, then what's the next thing, that the little B
I
down
think
there?
that goes along with the land disturbance of the single family lot. That's what they have to do. So it should be like an I.
Then that would become a,
Roman room, yeah.
let me see, the D would be, what comes after D, I don't know, let me see. What is it? I guess it's a little I, is that it?
Yeah, you get the little eye after the.
Okay, then those are. Then what comes after then? And then we go to I guess a one with friends around it, I guess.
That's right.
Is that right?
That, 1 and 2 is under the I, right?
I guess so, so.
Yeah.
Of course, we don't need an I if there's no little double I. And I don't think there ever is.
You might want to go down a little more.
Huh?
Now what's next?
I don't think,
Into. Yep, all right, that's right.
oh, I don't see what you're doing there, it's
Well, a lot of the formatting stuff, you can also definitely go over it.
That's all right, it's good. It's hard, but
Yeah.
it's hard to pick up on it when you're reading.
Can't get it with.
I mean, that will be down.
well, can we go back to number 4, regulation of land use?
Oh, okay, we can go back and then try to figure this out.
Yeah, regulation of. Does it have to say having been determined to be in the best interest of the city? It just, I mean, why are we saying all that stuff? It's just. It's just
I agree.
more words.
You can take it out easy enough.
Shall be done in a manner consistent with the review procedures and performance standards identified. Is it really herein, or is it in the Soloco manual? And so that's why I'm thinking that we ought to also, when we're identifying the Soloco in parentheses, we ought to put the manual or something where you can continue to identify it, maybe.
Well, I think herein might be applicable. Because it's talking about the review procedures and performance standards. As opposed to like uses and structures.
Procedures and performance standards identified. Okay.
But I agree with
I mean,
taking out.
I guess
the-
herein would include the manual. right?
Yes,
Okay.
but I agree that, the language after wetlands and before shall should be taken out.
Then down on under item B, number 2, exceptions, where it says wetland delineation shall not be required under the following circumstances. This is where it says if the site is less than 5 acres. And I was gonna, this business of single family residential for 10 years, I mean, that seems a little long. I was just gonna say it has been continuously utilized as a single family residence property for at least 3 years from the date of adoption. I don't know. What do y'all think? Does it have to be a 10-year-old house?
To be exempt.
This is just talking about when a delineation is required. I guess it doesn't mean that it's not subject to the regulation, it's just whether you have to have a delineation report, right? And,
And a relatively recently built house would, well, maybe it does need to be 10 years then.
so what it's saying is that if you're having a land disturbing activity, you gotta get a delineation study, except in certain circumstances, and one of those is if it's a relatively small site and it's been continuously used as a residential property for some period of time. Not sure exactly why it's that way, but they're just trying to save somebody from having to go through a lot
Yeah,
of
just,
expense.
and they should, I think, a single family homeowner should
Yeah,
be exempted from the wetlands standard.
if for a considerable period of time, the question is how long, is it 3 years or 10 years or yesterday, I don't know.
Well, if it's a later one, then it's gonna probably be falling under this regulation anyway.
Kurt, do you have any comments on this and this language?
Yeah, I think I think Bill kind of said it to this is kind of an exemption. So,
So I don't know, 3 or 10 years, Paul said shorter period of time, this one said 10 years,
and wouldn't you want it longer? Should we
depends
just,
who you are.
well, I guess so. Should we just
Strike
strike
it
it
over to the
from,
property, you want it yesterday.
should we just get rid of anything beyond property? That time that
You as a single family residential.
it just has been utilized as a single family residential property,
Why
period.
don't we just leave it at 5 acres? I mean, if that's gonna be, it's 5 acres plus being used as a single family residential property. Well, wait a minute, that would bring in commercial, you don't wanna do that, so. Less than 5 acres and having been exclusively used as single family residence.
So basically,
It's 10 years,
a residential lot, anything, a residentially
it's a
used lot
residential lot.
under 5 acres.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, the phrase used as a residential property might arguably not include an undeveloped lot. So if you had a lot that you don't have a house on,
Well, that's right,
Well,
it would not include a lot.
it's a developed lot that has been developed and utilized.
but do we want to use that residential lot that's been previously platted, zoned as a residential lot for a long, long time? It's right next door to the other residential lot that does have a house on it.
That's right, I mean, you buy a lot, you're gonna retire, you're in the Navy, you're gonna retire in 10 more years and build your house and all of a sudden,
You wanna build your house on the lot and you let your kids live in the next door house that's already built or something, I mean.
If you got a lot in the wetland.
Is this saying that, I'm kind of confused what this means, like, is this saying that any residential lot less than 5 acres does not have to comply with any of these wetland requirements?
I think it just says just the delineation.
You're basically saying, is it a wetland? We don't have to bother with this if you have an old residential lot.
Right.
So like you don't have to bother with the buffer requirements?
No, you
No,
don't have
that's
to bother with that, it's a wetland.
That's
don't have
totally
to.
separate.
Well, okay.
I had wondered if we should add,
So if you were gonna develop, if you were gonna do something in your lot, you wouldn't have to say that it's
You wouldn't have to
Delineate.
delineate it, you wouldn't have to show for a wetland delineation on your.
if you, the lot's been utilized.
I got you.
Single family.
Okay.
I wondered if it'd be helpful after 5 acres and less than 200 lineal feet of wetland frontage. So that you're actually dealing with wetland frontage as well as the acreage from a size standpoint.
Well, I think this is an exception, it's not really the
Right.
frontage, so why would you add that then? This is just to say you don't have to bother with it. If you've got you got a house that you've been using forever, you have an addition, or you wanna knock the house down, you're exempt. You don't have to do all this stuff. That's the way I.
Well, it's not quite that way, because, you know, the little B says you gotta, there's a certification involved. It's not saying that if it's a wetland and it's just been used as a residential property, you're exempt from all this. It has to do with, you know, what you know. And whether you have to get a wetlands delineation study to prove a point. So if you're able to certify the best of your knowledge and belief that there are no wetlands or wetland buffers on the site. And there were no previous delineations and it's been exclusively residential, then you're basically free and clear, but if you know that it's a wetlands, that doesn't mean that.
But the layman isn't gonna know if it's a wetland because a
It's-
wetland is determined by plant type and it doesn't have to be
Well-
wet.
It is, I will agree with you that it's pretty, it's not always what it seems. But if you've got a million cattails in the.
Oh,
in the land,
sure.
Eddie
It's obvious.
knows that it's a wetland. You know, but I think that's the point of it, if you're just an innocent residential owner.
That's what the developer's got, you know, filling it in at night and.
So I'm just wondering, do we need an actual definition of wetland and of wetland delineation?
Well, that's what this is,
Well, I had put on number 1 after delineation. I had professionally prepared by a certified wetland delineator.
Under
Because,
B1?
yeah, because in my experience, I've had to have the wetlands delineated by, usually it's Corps of Engineers or somebody from them that is delineating.
There are professional
Yeah,
firms.
Asher Howell will come out and.
Yeah.
And that's a,
And he can certify whether you got a wetland or.
They're
not.
usually,
Well,
and is that
well,
his
the
title of
boundaries of
wetland
wetland
delineator?
No.
no, they're
They're
environmental.
engineers.
They're environmental engineers. They're environmental engineers.
but so. This is Bluffton's ordinance, and it seems like it's getting.
I would just take the 10
How about
year
we just
thing out
put
of there.
exceptions and just say, well, you
I
know,
would-
any residential lot of record?
I-
And just any plotted residential lot of record.
I think the residents,
Exempt.
I think the thing is okay, there, I just take the 10 years out, but I think the exclusively utilized as a residential thing
But
is fine.
But you still, when you get down there, you have to kind of do a lot of things and, you know, if you're a resident,
Hoops on B and C.
that's a lot of hoops.
Yeah.
Well, it's basically saying,
Well, what's gonna happen to the owner who certifies that he's, I don't think I got a wetland. and
Yeah, I know, they're
turns
gonna.
out he's got it.
it's a vested knowledge thing, it's sort of like, that's what you do when you have a hazardous waste site or something, it's a vested knowledge, we could say to actual knowledge, but that's a.
So that's a legal standard.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, does the city do do you have to take that affidavit on space? Or could the city say,
Well, it can
hey,
be,
no.
if it's a big deal, it can be challenged, but it's, in most cases, it's not gonna be. It's just gonna be, the guy hands in an affidavit, I've just been living on this site forever, and I have no idea of any of this, and the city's gonna accept it at face value, unless a neighbor or somebody says, you know, the guy is fully aware of what's going on, he knew this was, and here's the evidence that he did, and yada, yada, I mean,
I think the way
I
that's
think the way it's
written,
written is pretty good.
but yeah, but it's still saying prior to any land
Well,
disturbance.
should it say
Anywhere in the city, right, and then you gotta provide this affidavit, that's gonna be kind of, I think, a lot.
Should it say a wetland delineation shall not be required under any of the following circumstances? Or does it require all of the following circumstances?
The way it's written, it's required for really anything in the city, you gotta provide a wetland.
Oh, I think, I see what you're saying.
And you
Yeah.
wanna do, now I'm reading this, I'm like, I didn't really think about that, now that we're focusing on it.
I see what
Do
you're
we
saying.
wanna do that? Because.
Because you're
if you were
saying
to
that,
say
you're saying virtually anything could theoretically be a wetlands. So anytime you come forward, you'll have to have a required form signed. I see what you're saying.
What
Yeah,
about
that
a
would really-
wetland delineation prepared by professional or by an environmental engineer shall be required at the discretion of the administrator? And then that that assumes the city knows where
I
the
see.
wetlands are and
They
doesn't
don't.
rely on a,
They don't.
well, yeah, but it's like a catch 22 for the,
But it's not just this city, it's most cities, most places don't. I mean, the only thing that's out there is whatever.
well, if you
FEMA
don't
would have
know,
done,
then you ask
or
for a
USGS.
wetland delineation or an affidavit.
Well, what he's saying is it will now become a required form in any new application package that somebody has to.
If you wanna put an addition on.
Anything over 5 acres. Though. If you're 5 acres or less, which is your residential, you don't have to worry about, but if you're made a larger development, which more
Well,
than
but
5 acres is, you should be doing that.
No, I agree, but what he's saying is that if it's 5 acres or less, maybe we just stop and say if it's a resident, if it's been continuously occupied, or if it's occupied as a residential lot. You don't have to do it, because the way it reads
Right.
right now is even if it's residentially occupied, you still have to provide that affidavit, and what Kurt is saying is, let's not make somebody go to that trouble every time.
Well, that's why I say leave it to the discretion of the administrator.
Yeah,
But
but then-
the administrator here has changed and, there's good ones and bad ones, so. The previous administrator was requiring like anything you did in the historic district, anything at all to go to the HRB, and that did not go over too well, let's just put it that way. Yeah.
Exception number A under 2 is definitive. Anything residential, 5 acres or less, that's it. You don't have to do anything.
Well, then you gotta get rid of B, C, and
Yeah. Aggressive.
Because these are ants, they're cumulative.
Yeah.
That's the way they appear to be written, that's right.
But I also think that we should not say used as residential, I should say platted as residential.
Well-
Because there are vacant residential lots.
Lot of record.
Residential,
I don't know, there may be some people illegally, I think I would say used. Don't you think?
No.
If somebody's got a junk car lot legally operating on a platted residential lot, I don't think it should be.
Well, I don't
exempt.
know.
well, but I mean, if you platted the lot, and it's just, you own it, then why should you have, it's just like the Navy guy and Paul was bringing up, or Tim was bringing up. Just because you didn't build on it, why would you have to do all this?
Yeah, or the house burned down on the lot, and it took you a couple of years to get organized.
I don't care, doesn't make that much difference to me.
All right, well, let's just get rid of
I
C,
think
D, and.
D and C should go.
Do you wanna get rid of the 10 years too?
Well, we'll get,
Or not?
oh, yeah,
Yeah,
I guess so, yeah. We can't even figure why that's there.
Are we gonna title it a professional wetland delineation survey slash report?
Provide
Just or something
Prepared
like
by
that.
an environmental engineer.
You wanna include that language in there?
let's get rid of it.
Well, I mean. Who is authorized? Is there anything that, who is authorized to do a wetland delineation?
Well, the people don't take it on unless they know what they're doing, and there are certain specified firms that. Mark, they do wetlands delineations and they also do a variety of other, environmental kind of, they'll do bat surveys, they'll do.
Well, does like a
No.
regular surveyor do it?
No, they usually call themselves such and such ecological services or so and so environmental
Environmental
consulting,
engineers.
they usually get those
I can
names
tell
on
you
it.
who they are.
What was the portion you were saying, Christopher?
Well, what we had said before, wetland delineation, whatever, prepared by a professional, environmental engineer or whatever they're called, I don't know.
Yeah, I would just say,
Professional consultant?
Or something like that.
I would just say environmental engineer, that's
Put
fine.
the environmental engineer and tie it to the wetlands.
Yeah.
Professional could be civil engineer, what you call.
Yeah, so this guy Asher Howell works for a company called Newkirk Environmental. He's a
Yeah.
biologist.
That's right, they're not all engineers, they're biologists.
Prepared by a professional.
Newkirk Environmental.
Environmental consultants,
Yeah.
consulting.
No, what are you talking about? I'm sorry.
We're trying to describe the person who has to.
Just call them an environmental engineer, that's good enough, I mean, we're not saying a PE, we're saying an environmental engineer, that's usually what they call themselves.
Now, if you're talking about delineation, you're actually talking about a survey that delineates
No, what
where the wetlands are. That's what I've had to do in my.
Yeah, but it
where I've
isn't,
had to do it.
yeah, but it isn't a surveyor, it's somebody that goes out in a piece of ground that's fairly well determined, it identifies plant types and all that kind of
Soil
condition.
makeup.
Yeah, soil characteristics, that's exactly right.
But that just determines whether it's wetlands. The
Right.
delineation part is a survey.
Yeah,
You have to have a survey.
You're right.
Like they're gonna show a boundary on.
Yeah, that's what-
That's
Yeah, they will.
Absolutely.
But they can take, well, I'm just saying, they can take an existing boundary, they don't have to go and resurvey it, they're delineating what part of
The surveyor and the engineer will call this guy, he'll go out
Yeah.
and do the delineation and provide them with the data that they probably then put on the survey.
That's what they do.
It's gotta be surveyed.
Has to be surveyed.
Well,
Yeah.
let's include that then here, and let's call it a wetland delineation survey up here.
Yeah.
And wetland delineation survey required and added in here too. That's what I thought too. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I think we know what that means.
Under exceptions, so you can add it.
Are you using the word survey for some shooting or for a study?
Oh, no, it's just.
It's a study and they determine the boundaries of it.
Delineate.
Right, you have to delineate it.
It'll result in a plat.
Maybe like.
Yes,
Yeah.
so you're gonna do the survey first, then you're gonna do the wetlands determination.
Three of the same.
You're gonna survey the property.
Probably, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You're gonna bring a wetlands guy in to say
Yes.
dirt, soil, plants.
It could go that way.
You're doing that. You have to delineate where that is.
I know, and I'm
You
saying,
cannot-
the surveyors lays out the property.
But not the
It doesn't
wetlands.
maybe- It's not visible.
You're
so
saying
maybe that's
That
probably
on the property, there could be wetlands and not.
That's right.
Oh, and that's needed, given the bounds.
But since it came back up, it's not working, because we're gonna be
But I'm not able to.
talking about buffering the wetland, so we gotta figure out where it's buffering
Yeah.
to, because like.
Okay.
Oh, okay, that's not what it says on the board there. Is that what it is?
All right.
Okay.
Are we good with this? I'm deleting all that? Do we need all of this language in here? The land disturbance or activity proposed is accessory to or consistent with a single family residential use and support.
Okay,
and
so
support.
Well, that seems to be, that might be important. That's part of the affidavit though. That's the problem, yeah. I mean, that seems to be important, because if a guy is just, if it's less than 5 acres and it's been residentially utilized and somebody's taking it and turning it into a commercial use, that we're not intending to be exempt, right? It's just for continued residential purposes. Isn't that true?
Yes.
So the next one would be kind of important, we keep it,
I think I probably should go,
but I think that was intended to be.
but maybe that's a whole different section, yeah, maybe it's a whole different. I don't know, let's go down and look at that.
Maybe that's part of the same sentence, but it's the land disturbance or activity proposed. Shall be accessory or consistent, maybe that's the part of it, because we're exempting them, but it has to be, it's only exempt if it's continues to be used for residential purposes or accessory to it. Right?
Correct.
Where was that sentence? That's, you get rid of everything after, in 2 up to 3 then. Where were we? So that sentence says, if the site is less than 5 acres and has been platted as a residential lot. And maybe it's get rid of the and, say, I'm just throwing this out. The site is less than 5 acres, comma, has been platted as a residential single family lot. And then go down to 3, the land disturbance or activity is accessory or consistent. Maybe that's the way it should read.
Just put the.
And then go to the. And with a small t, the land disturbance or activity is accessory or consistent. So that's the exemption then, right? Now, if the guy wants to turn it into a car lot. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then the rest of that.
Or what about, just one thing on that, what about allowed accessory buildings? Like for short-term rental, and if it put on, I mean. If that would increase the density.
No, not if it doesn't increase the density per code if you just have an accessory dwelling unit on it.
It doesn't.
I don't think so. It's
Like if you put a accessory dwelling duplex on the back of your 5 acre lot, would that not increase the density?
yeah, not from a code perspective, it doesn't.
Usually it does, but our code doesn't go by density requirements, so in that case, it doesn't.
Okay, but here we have
I
it,
mean, we're not.
Well, even in a density related code, if you're allowing accessory
Yeah.
dwelling units, a single family lot doesn't suddenly become a 2-family lot just because you have an accessory dwelling unit. They're just that's the whole idea of
well, why do we have a
In-law
reference
suite or
to
whatever.
density in this section then?
That's-
Maybe we just take it out.
well, consistent with a single family residential use. Yeah, just probably add it, period.
Yeah, period.
I think you're right.
Strike
Yeah.
that density.
But we would have.
It was a belt suspenders.
Right after that.
Then the rest of that, I think, is part of that whole,
I think I can go.
the rest of that comes out because it's all part of that affidavit thing. Right? All the way up to C, I guess, right?
Yeah.
All right.
We did it. Nick, could you save those changes
Now,
in between?
now you got a whole nother wetland buffer in addition to your buffer from the critical line. I mean, can we simply? I mean, why, and this thing says it needs to be 100-foot buffer from a wetland. But it's only gotta be in certain cases a 30 or a 50 from the marsh, I mean, from the critical line, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, this is for Bluffton.
So,
So do you want to go?
well, what I'm asking for simplicity's sake is, can we add wetland buffer to the buffer that we've already gone through and have a buffer from the critical line and any wetland and have it mirror each other? Or is that, or does the wetland buffer need to be different for some reason?
Well, that's a good question.
I mean, you got a whole big section here.
Yes.
I mean, a wetland can be something pretty small. It's a lot different than a river.
Yeah.
Marsh, I mean,
Well, the thing is, I think the distinction is what kind of bodies, jurisdictional bodies of waters are we talking about? The critical line usually is along waters of the United States,
right,
you know?
right.
So the jurisdiction falls to the state, therefore the critical line. Whereas wetlands are not considered waters of the United States.
Well, I know.
They're isolated and they're really locally,
So
so.
all we're talking about is the buffer. I mean, we're gonna
Yeah.
define, we're
Well,
gonna
we may not even-
delineate what the wetland is, and OCRM is gonna delineate the critical line. The engineer's gonna delineate the wetland. Now, all we're talking about is the buffer.
Well, and so part of the question is, do you even require a buffer around a wetland?
That's what we're doing, requiring it.
No, I know, but to Paul's question is, do we really need to have a buffer around a wetland, especially if we're just talking
This can
about
go pretty quickly, we can just delete it.
well, that's what I'm saying.
I,
Because you have these isolated wetlands on large pieces of property, and if all of a sudden you're losing an acre here and an acre there on a large development site because they're wetlands, and now you got, you know, setbacks around them, all of a sudden that acre goes to multiple.
I mean, your
acres because of
stormwater,
the-
your stormwater pond is a wetland. So does that mean you can't have your service drive running along just the outside the fence of your stormwater pond? I mean, this just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you have a wetland buffer at all.
Wetland.
I'm wondering if you have, I'm just throwing it out, whether we have a wetland at all outside of those critical areas that we were already regulating in a pretty significant way.
I mean, I think it's probably sensible to stand off of a delineated wetland to a certain degree. You should stand off from it, but I
So with
mean,
30 feet, you can.
yeah, 30 feet. Stay away from it. You can't do anything with 30 feet.
Riparian wetland
Yeah,
buffer
I
should
mean,
stay
I agree with
50 feet,
that.
maybe,
100 is
because that's a river or a creek.
Especially for a city.
That seems like you'd want more of a wetland there.
Well, so, okay, one of the changes we made earlier on was, you know, with regard to the critical area buffer, we added the word to 8.2.1, we added the words and shorelines. Is that appropriate to put that there in light of what we're talking about now?
Yeah. So.
But I mean, do we need to, are we talking about all, I mean, for example, does your pond, your retention pond have a critical area buffer?
No, I mean, this is all done by OCRM, the critical.
So that's why I'm thinking maybe we shouldn't put and shorelines. back
Well,
where
that's
we
usually
just-
where
That shorelines and marshes. It's not wetlands.
Well, you know, you've got back behind, Bobby Cooler's boat place back here, you know, on whatever that street is, you got a big wetland back there. So, you know, and
Guys, we're trying to save the environment now. You guys are trying to.
Well, you know, this is another thing that we asked for.
Well, I
to have
mean,
in
we
our
are being
meeting.
inundated by sea level rise and.
well, no, I think that you should stand off of a wetland to
But
some reasonable degree, but.
that'll, I just showed you, if you got a wetland, I just put 30 feet in there, that's 30-foot diameter. And if you have a 30 feet on all sides of it, you've exponentially actually created the area that you're protecting.
Yeah,
So, but I don't, so if you're gonna have a buffer, you wanna, I don't know how the math works, but you don't wanna go from what is a small area to an astronomically larger
No.
area because you just created a huge buffer over a small.
right.
That's why I think we need some definitions and,
I'm trying to look at it.
we don't have them
See what
in
it is
here.
here.
And the other thing that we requested, but we did not see here today is a map that would show some areas that we're talking about. And you
I
know.
don't, we don't have a problem.
I mean, could we make one like the old fashioned way with like a magic marker or a highlighter on a regular map, just to kind of
Well,
show?
I don't know where we would, I mean, I don't know where we would get it from.
No, we have a GIS technician and she could
Yeah,
make
but-
up a map for us.
So where are we gonna get the wetland?
I don't think you're gonna find
Delineated
it.
wetland
Well,
area.
from, I don't know, whoever has this, the shape file or
The
the.
wetlands come and go.
Yeah.
They do.
We don't, there's no, there's no.
You can get
There
an
is no
impoundment
map.
created
What source?
in a year.
I think that we ought to be concerned more about wetlands. We're in the low country, right? And so as part of the low country, you have tidal creeks and you have tidal areas, and those affect what the wetlands are. But in addition to that, we have areas, large areas that become wetlands that are not connected to any kind of waterway or anything else at the same time. And I have a feeling that we should be worried about wetlands as they're connected to waterways, not necessarily other than that.
So if we're gonna do that, we need to find some way of defining it. You know, because just wetlands without a definition doesn't do that job.
No, but that's problematic, but
problem, yes.
that's the problem that you get into. But I think that needs to be more administrative than anything else. I think if we left the language all the way we have it set in here, and then anything that's comes up as controversial as to whether it's wetlands or what it is, maybe that becomes more administrative.
Well, but I think that's, well, I think we're trying to get away from things that are not defined in this code, in all the work that we've done today. And B, I think that kind of discretion is problematic, both from the administrator's perspective in terms of applying it, and then the problem that Kurt noted about changes in administration.
Wetlands are defined. We don't have to define wetlands, they are defined.
By who, where?
Federal government.
No, well, then put the federal government's definition in this code,
I wouldn't
if that's
do
what
that.
we're gonna use.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of, there's like fins and there's, I'm looking it up right now.
I would
A lot of wetlands.
I would leave it here
Moccasin.
as the delineated wetlands.
Logs.
And you'd have to have somebody delineate it.
Wetlands delineated by by a professional.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Let's put it in that way.
So what if in a situation that's previously undeveloped, no occasion to delineate anything? What triggers the need for a buffer or protection of wetlands? That's what we need to define, in my opinion.
There is like a lot of wetland types, like I'm on the EPA side. and there's a whole
We can refer
matrix
to
of
other
wetlands.
sources.
Matrix of wetlands.
So this, what I'm looking at in the Louisville Land Development Code that I'm familiar with, it says, it talks about the delineation of boundaries of a wetland in keeping with the standards specified by the Corps of Engineers Wetlands Delineation Manual, Technical Report Y 87-1, edition January 1987. So, you know, they probably update these things as well. But, and you said federal government, it is, the Corps of
Yeah, it
Engineers,
is.
yeah.
I've had to
And
do
so, yeah, and so,
So could we not adopt it by reference as opposed to putting it all in there? Because
well, it's a manual that tells you how to delineate a wetlands, because they're not all mapped. And the mapping that's done isn't necessarily accurate, because you're right, they do come and go.
Come and go.
And it's all based on hydric soils, and plant types tend to help identify that, but you're looking at soils and plants, and that's why it takes a qualified engineer to be able to actually truly identify them.
Maybe, it's too bad that Jesse White is not here today, because, you know, I wonder if the Coastal Conservation League has some helpful input on this, and
What?
maybe we could ask her even.
Well, I think the only thing we're looking at right now is whether we got to the issue of wetlands, because we know that all we've said so far is that we don't want to require people who are in a residential lot to have to worry about it. Yeah, other types of development, yeah. My experience is you can't develop in wetlands. Now, it's up to you to be able to demonstrate that you're not developing in a wetlands because, you know, there are federal laws that deal with this, and you don't want to violate federal law on this. Now, if we would do it locally, the
That was the
same thing.
whole point of this.
Because the federal laws have gone by the wayside.
Well, they haven't entirely gone by the wayside. We're not just we're calling a lot of things that were previously called wetlands, we're not calling them wetlands as we used to.
Right.
You know,
Because
Because-
that law has been challenged.
because, yeah,
So a
right.
lot of the wetlands,
So a lot of locals are saying, well, we're gonna take up the cause of protecting wetlands since the federal government, at least temporarily, has scaled back on that. So we can define wetlands however we want. You know, and if we wanna say that they're determined pursuant to this Corps of Engineers manual, we can do that, you know? And
Well,
it's
that's what
probably,
the engineer's gonna do. He's gonna use that manual.
right,
So we probably need to rely on that if we're gonna use an engineer.
that's right. And so then what we would do, the question is, are we just saying you can't develop in the wetlands, or is it you can't develop in the wetlands and a buffer area outside of it? And that was the immediate question is, are we more concerned about a greater area than just
Well,
protecting
this,
the
this whole
wetlands?
idea is of
I don't know.
buffer. This is the whole thing is it's creating a buffer.
I just don't think you need to create a larger buffer around a jurisdictional wetland than you would have from the saltwater critical line. Just doesn't make
yeah,
any sense.
I agree. I think that 30 feet is good, and I do think you do need a buffer just because, you know, your habitat for birds and stuff, you don't want to build right up.
But what about, you know, this example, excuse me, Bill? A wetland that's contained entirely within a lot.
Yeah.
Do you want to have a 30-foot
Well,
buffer?
then you can go to
I
the
think-
zoning board.
Well, see,
of
people
appeals.
mitigate wetlands. You know, you can legally,
You can mitigate them.
you can mitigate your wetland. So if you've got a wetland, you go and go through the process of
Right.
getting permitted, and that's what this guy, Asher Howell, does. He helps you do that.
You can either buy in a wetlands bank,
That's
or
right.
you can
That's
create
right.
a new wetlands.
Well, the thing is with the purpose of the critical line buffer is to prevent storm surges from hurricanes to come up too close to the house, so you have that buffer in place for tropical storms and such. That's pushing water up from the ocean and the rivers. The isolated wetlands in this area is where the rainwater actually flows into. So it's kind of like a natural stormwater detention area. So that's not storm surge, that's actually stormwater from heavy rainfall. So what happens is if you really do have heavy rain, it can flood over the berm of that established whatever it is. I mean, there are pockets throughout Port Royal Island where you have these natural depressions that do flood. And they can come up pretty high depending how much rain you get.
Well, in the old point, and, you know, and like where I live, King Street, that happens.
And that's what Port Royal did. They dug out the Cypress wetlands because that's part of their stormwater management. Basically, there was a natural depression. They dug it out further in order to manage the runoff that's, you know, within Port Royal. So it is part of a natural stormwater retention. Of course, you can mitigate it and you can provide alternative stormwater retention facilities on site if you're covering those up. But I think that's the intention, is to kind of not have development go all the way to the edge, because what could happen is you're gonna have flooding eventually.
So,
If you don't manage it, of course, you can alternatively put in a stormwater retention pond or whatever, rain garden that you engineer, basically, right?
it's most
But-
likely to be done with a commercial property. And, you know, for individual lot owner to have any buffer is basically protecting them against themselves, I guess.
Yeah.
You
But
know,
we've just exempted the residential.
But you can't prohibit activities even in a buffer or in a wetland. For example, if you've got a stormwater pond, stuff grows up in the pipes. Every now and then you gotta pull it out. You gotta cut the grass on the banks. You know, you gotta do all that stuff. So I just do we, I just don't.
Do we wanna keep it, do we wanna do this?
I don't think we wanna do it. I just think, I think we
Do
make
you
it
want
very
to
simple.
down to 30 feet? And then maybe the riparian in the park is
I think-
larger.
I think what we're interested in is wetlands as it relates to waterways and
That's right.
tidal creeks.
That's right.
Like I said before, I think that's what we're related to. The other wetlands that you're talking about, stormwater, those are always an issue,
So
but
then-
you deal with that through
And then
engineering.
we have a riparian, we have a park, then we would need to say, you know, Tidal Creek and, right, what's the
Yeah.
other one you were talking, we already had.
Waterways and tidal creeks.
Waterways and Tidal Creek.
Yeah, like,
But just make stormwater facilities and drainage ditches immune, you know, you just gotta.
And the waterways and tidal creeks are covered by the critical lines.
That's right.
So, I mean.
Why would you do that?
Right, they're covered by the critical line, but if you get wetlands associated with those, it wouldn't be, that's all.
The wetlands associated with stormwater retention, detention, drainage, ditches, that kind of thing should not be counted as for a setback.
They should just be engineered.
Yeah.
So do we wanna do this? I mean, I think that's the question. I mean, then, you know, what's the point of all this section? Right? If we're just going back to the critical line and we're not gonna do, you know, then why? And
I don't know that we've got that much freshwater wetlands to really be concerned about. I mean, you know, over in Mossy Oaks, you got some in people's backyards, you go down to
I
it.
think you're right. I mean, that's probably the main difference between Bluffton area and Beaufort. We don't really have that, the extent of wetlands that they have down there. Right? Because
No.
their wetlands are,
Well, the town of Bluffton has got all kinds of coming out of the New River. I mean, they have got
right,
zillions of acres
yes,
of wet land.
right.
Well, so
That
it's-
tends to flood, right? So.
Like, can we say at least like at the discretion, like required at the discretion? of the planning commission? If we want to.
to give us the option of imposing a wetlands buffer.
That's too arbitrary.
yeah, I think you either get rid of it or keep it. Like,
I'll
again,
vote
we're
get rid of
just.
it.
I think so too. I don't think
Then we
we
just
just
Wait a
get rid of
second,
it.
wait a second, you're saying what?
just get rid of the wetland buffer.
So what, just before you do it, you're just saying is. You can develop in a wetland, but we're not, once you're outside of the wetland, we're not concerned about it. Is that what we're saying here?
You cannot develop in a wetland unless it's mitigated. That's right. But that's not an issue for the
But-
city,
That's not what this section is.
Well,
It's a buffer.
or is it?
So. The Corps of Engineers does still regulate development in wetlands.
Yes.
And so what you're suggesting is,
This whole
If-
addition is a buffer area.
so if we're not gonna regulate buffers, then we're really not in the wetlands
So
business
this
at all.
whole, the next few pages, you can just
Right,
delete.
So what?
that's
are we
fine, I'm just,
talking-
I'm just trying to get it
what's the
straight out.
total area?
I'm just trying to, I don't have a problem with a setback from a long existing pond, which we do have some of those ponds and
Yeah.
wetlands. But manufactured stormwater facilities, which include swales and ditches and the pond itself. You shouldn't be necessarily having a big buffer setback from those. That's all I'm saying.
Well, then I think you just get rid of almost all of this. So are we still, do you
Get rid
want
of-
it, do you want it or not?
Get rid of all of C, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
Starting
well,
at
all the way down the next few pages, because that's what it all is. It's all about wetland, creating a wetland buffer.
Well, we still wanna get the wetland delineation survey.
Right.
But,
You know,
so we want to
yes.
keep A and B, but get rid of C. Is that right?
Well, that's what it sounds like.
Are we allowing
Unless someone
filling
goes-
in of wetlands?
It would have to be done pursuant to a permit issued by the Army Corps.
Okay,
And I think we ought to leave it to the Army Corps to determine whether or not, because they've got regulations, and that's where you hire Newkirk Environmental to yay or nay. What do you do?
building in the wetlands.
Okay, well, we'd like to delete it.
We're being productive now, aren't we?
Hey, that was, we just did more work in that 1 minute than we have all the rest of the day.
I will,
So I think that gets us to page 12.
I'll probably send you all, this, it's a PowerPoint that was provided by, the Corps of Engineers with respect to
Oh, there is some.
issue of continuous surface connection guidance after the recent Supreme Court decision. And this is just came out on April 29, 2025, and it's got some really good, graphics in here and so forth that deal with some of these issues that you were talking about, culverts and stuff. I'll send it all to you.
Thank you.
Complicated stuff, but this PowerPoint actually better. Almost.
Wow. It's impressive from the federal government. All right, well, let's go down. I think we've kind of.
Today's your anniversary, you better go.
That's where I'm going.
I gotta get out of here, guys.
Yeah, this is really good.
Ask them what's your family.
See you all.
All right, Bill, see
See
you.
you all Monday.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right, well, let's go over in violations. Is that what? Okay.
Our first thing on violations is in the third sentence where it says. Get my glasses. Reasonable time. That. You know, what we've been doing is putting in defined. Time limits, reasonable is kind of ill-defined, so. We need to put something in there. 90 days, 6 months.
There should be a time frame, but let me ask this question. What if, does the city have the authority to require remediation of the wetland if someone damages that or made? Or is that,
That's what we're
is that
trying.
more of a federal issue?
Well, that's what they're trying to have. Because the feds have said it not. That was the whole Supreme Court.
Oh, well, I beg your
The
pardon.
feds have
Okay.
washed their.
Then we should, if someone deliberately fills in a wetland, then.
Well,
they
I don't
should
think
be-
you're gonna do that in 90 days. I think a reasonable time frame. Who knows how?
It's gonna depend on what it is.
Reasonable time period not to exceed 180 days.
Unless special circumstances,
I wouldn't, yeah, that's it, okay. I would.
well, I think, you know, depending on the nature of the violation and why it was done and what happened, it could conceivably take longer than 180 days to fix wetlands.
Absolutely.
Well, reasonable is,
Catch them.
yeah.
It's like a reasonable time depending on the circumstance.
Yeah, I just don't know what we do for reasonable time, so.
Yeah, I
I
don't
don't know
want
what the answer is.
It should have some kind of a time frame.
I like 180 days to start with, that's kind of reasonable.
180 days and, some kind of language that, the applicant could ask for an extension if, or the owner could ask for an extension, for good cause, if necessary. So that gives you a time frame, but it also gives flexibility.
180 days and 180 day extension as determined by the code administrator.
It has to have a showing of good cause for an extension.
Or you could leave the extension undefined,
I would leave it undefined.
just, as allowed by the administrator.
on a showing of good cause.
Okay.
You wanna say, and an extension of 180 days if necessary or something like that, as allowed by the administrator. The extension would be another 180 days, correct? Or it doesn't matter. I guess the zoning administrator can determine that and.
Well, I think that says it, or is
Or
may,
as allowed.
may be allowed by the administrator upon showing of good cause.
So in B, the place must be in writing.
I have city admin, I should probably say code. The code administrator.
Look here. Should we require that any complaints be, under oath?
What's being writing and company.
It has to be in writing, but you know, theoretically, you could get an anonymous complaint.
I mean.
Because somebody doesn't want to turn their neighbor in or something like that.
That seems,
That never happens.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know that we don't have to go there. I don't think we get any complaints going, because.
Well, I mean, it's a pretty serious thing to complain of, you know.
Well, all the complaint is really doing is making the city aware of the
Yeah, we're just trying
situation,
to-
and then the city can determine for itself.
And we're investigating.
Before you get there, should we put something under A?
It's in writing, it becomes public record.
After, violations shall be held liable to the city of Beaufort and fined on property.
What about this remedies under chapter 12?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Remedies under chapter 12.
Or subject
Loss of res, shall be subject to remedies, yeah.
Loss of
Subject
such
to,
right and chapter 12. Chapter 12.
Chapter.
We never do. You never actually get to it.
as set forth in chapter 12.
Of this code.
I've got it down to archaeological back,
Wait a minute, we
almost.
almost.
Maybe it's good as is, but.
Chapter 11 is non-conformities, Mike. Oh, okay.
That was backwards.
So we're good with all that, and then. What proposed changes are. There wasn't any proposed changes to the archaeological resources, but it's pretty,
Well, we
pretty.
still have rainwater cistern standard before we get to archaeology. We want that? Do we even want that?
I think so. I don't think it's all harmful, right? The question is, does it have to be regulated? I mean, anybody can do it if they wanted to, right? I mean.
Why do we need to regulate that?
I don't know why we need to regulate it. We use rainwater, we just catch it in a trash can, put a screen over it, pour it out in the garden.
You need to get a permit for that.
I know,
Well, I mean, I guess.
probably in violation as we speak.
In Western states, because of their water. You can't do that. You can't use rain.
Well, don't take our rain barrels from us.
Can't.
Kurt.
Sorry, but I'm fine, we can just delete.
Oh, they
it.
wanted to go into the
I
ground.
think we get rid of it.
Well, the only thing is, one thing about cisterns, not so much rain barrels, but an actual cistern is something that could pose a safety threat. You know, as an attractive nuisance to children for drowning
Sure.
purposes, and also a collapse of a cistern that is constructed too close to a house can, you know, hurt somebody or hurt a house.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean just because of that we need to regulate them.
Well, or
I mean-
have a nuisance ordinance.
Yeah, we'll have a nuisance ordinance, but then there's just common law nuisance
I don't
anyway.
think anyone who builds a cistern. I mean,
Yeah, one.
Well, old houses,
Turned
yeah.
it into a fountain.
Oh, was it in your basement or where was it?
Yeah.
In our back.
my mother's old house,
Backyard.
had one in the basement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had a row house that had a
Several
cistern in there.
old
I mean,
houses.
we.
I don't know if anybody builds it now,
I don't think
except
so.
in the islands. I mean, you know,
You're drawing, man.
Well.
Did you put it there?
Sure did.
Well,
that was smart. I turned it into a fountain. That was good.
Yeah.
Let's just dump, let's dump it. We don't need it.
Yeah, I don't think.
Right.
I mean, I didn't touch the archaeological impact assessment. It's pretty loose. It's basically just like, we could use it.
so did you hear that, Nick, we're getting rid of
We could,
C, all the, okay.
I read it. I didn't see anything wrong with it.
we could use it. It doesn't mean we have to use it. So it's pretty loose.
Well, we already require our, archaeology.
Is
Well, there's
this-
some things like that wall downtown behind some of those downtown buildings, that old tabby wall,
Yeah.
but that's pretty obvious stuff.
Not touched.
Now, I know the HR, the rather historic Beaufort HBF may have issues with this, but I mean, this is current code, so.
I leave it in there the way it is.
Just
I didn't see anything wrong, but
I agree.
Well, so, I mean, first of all, I think a lot of people, you know, I've had people come knocking on my door asking if they can dig in the yard and see if they can find anything. I mean, the archaeological tradition is strong here, and people informally are always digging things up, and there's a lot to find.
just tell me you didn't have any outhouses on your property.
what they were trying to do is create a well. And create a
That's
well.
it.
Well, there are lots of, you know, you can find a Civil War bullet under the ground just about anywhere.
Exactly.
Eventually it'll pop out.
So it says you're not allowed to excavate without a permit issued by the administrator in C.
Yeah, they determine that, that there is a need to do so.
Oh, wait, prohibited acts is the section that I'm reading. No person may excavate, blah, 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 blah. Unless such activity is pursuant to a permit issued by the administrator. Any person violating shall be subject to penalties. So that looks like an absolute permit.
Yeah, so you need to get a permit. Yeah.
So in other words, Alan Patterson has got to go when he's digging for bottles, has got to get a permit.
I think he needs to be locked up. Just kidding. Every kid in town that finds a, you know, arrowhead or something.
So do we want to leave that in there just as a potential enforcement mechanism against scofflaws? Or do we want to modify it to be reasonable?
I mean,
I just leave it alone.
yeah.
It's just for land disturbance.
Yeah.
You know that there's architectural. Or whatever architecture.
Archaeological.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to prohibit people that go into known archaeologically significant areas.
That's right.
From doing it without a permit, is that
And
it?
then if they do it, they have to meet certain standards.
That's right.
But if you're just digging in your backyard because you just wonder if that just happens to be a Civil War graveyard.
Just don't tell anybody.
Don't tell me, that's graveyard. I said a grave you're wondering if you're just.
Especially not the administrator.
Don't tell-
Come back and lock you up.
Okay, we're going to solar energy systems on 19 and 21.
Are you all okay with deleting that?
Solar energy system,
No, wind systems? Getting rid of,
windmills,
yeah. I just got rid of it.
I would.
I made it prohibited essentially.
What's the question, Shirley?
Well, I just deleted it all, so basically then you can't do it.
why?
I just didn't think that anybody in Beaufort wants a wind turbine next to them.
Oh, because it's not a permitted function anywhere?
Well, it is now, but I don't know why we would want it to.
No, I agree, we're not.
No, I'm just saying, right now, you say it's not permitted because.
No, it's permitted, it's all there.
The wind turbine, but I'm just saying, just taking this out doesn't necessarily mean it's prohibited. If somebody wants to put a windmill up, it would be, if the code is silent
The
on
code
it.
is silent, and then usually it's prohibited, right?
No,
No.
no,
Well-
just the opposite. I think that if you want to prohibit them, you gotta go more than just take this out. You have to say wind turbines are prohibited.
All right, well, we could put all wind turbines, I mean, that could just be A.
Go further.
Where did this all came from again, Bluffton or something?
No,
this
no,
is
no,
our
this is,
code.
this was our existing code.
So we're taking out the
I just-
ability to have your.
I mean, I'm not trying to make any kind of political or anything point, I just don't, we're not in like a.
No, it's impractical, no one's ever done it. That I'm aware
Maybe
of.
we just have a general prohibition.
If someone did,
If nobody's ever done one,
so let's just put,
And they-
put that 8.5.1 are prohibited in.
yeah,
Small wind energy systems are
The
prohibited.
small and.
any kind of wind.
Any wind, any,
Yeah, let's just
yeah.
change it to. Yeah.
Well, you still need to remain, you have to delete the.
Yeah, we have to.
Reverse the deletion because that title needs to stay in place and then.
That's right.
Can we
So
also
not
bring
even
out
like
I would get rid of the word small.
Yeah, just.
small has to go, wind energy.
I mean, not even like
So,
a
so
small, like
the
really
whole thing
small,
should
like.
be 8.5.1,
Sailboat people use.
as opposed to an A.
Do you think that's?
I mean, after all, the blade clearance had to otherwise been 15 feet above the ground.
Has there ever been one that anybody?
I don't know about enough about them, but we have all the birds here. And so.
Did they allow them in Colorado, Kurt?
Oh, yeah, sure. But
Did
we
you
don't
like,
have.
did you have a bad experience with the small wind
Have
energy
you
system?
driven like out west, have you driven like California? I mean,
Yeah.
they are,
Everywhere.
they're everywhere. And we have so many beautiful birds here.
No, I'm all.
Are they
I mean, it's like a
hazard
death sentence.
Okay.
It's
I don't
not
know if they
good.
want somebody to
It's
have
not-
on the top of the roof or wherever you. put
And
it.
they're now putting them out, water in the northeast, right?
Those things are.
They're huge.
You know what I
I
would
mean,
say?
they're a few hundred feet up.
The installation of it.
I didn't really think about, they don't shield them like with a, like a fan?
I don't know that, I think
Shield.
they.
They're huge. If you ever go to California or anywhere on the west,
Sure,
it's
I-
walks
Yeah.
on the hillside. It goes on for miles.
Okay. I was in California. I get stopped by the cell phone towers that are fake trees.
50% oil, 50%.
Power generator. No, that's an
Not
oil
pleasant.
generator.
But I guess it's like middle of nowhere. There's not really a lot of.
They've been looking out the window like.
Blades.
It's smaller.
Oh, well, that's.
They'll be replaced.
I mean, I guess you could always get a, with a ZBOA.
Yeah.
Funny, now you go through West Texas, yeah. You'll see, seems like oil derricks, they pump their pumps that are on top of it. Say no.
You know what happens when lightning strikes around here?
Yeah,
The internet goes out.
We don't want, a lot of these farmers, have that's where the money is. Winter
Okay,
comes
so
out,
let's move on to solar energy.
I've seen a couple of these.
Yeah,
I didn't touch this. This is all in the code.
but the internet, that's why the oil companies got it.
Are you okay with it?
I'm good.
Do we want a solar farm? I guess that's the bigger, is that should
Yeah.
be allowed in the. T1, is that good?
No, not in T1, I should not.
RMX seems like a bad site.
No.
I don't know that a solar farm is appropriate. They've got one out there in Burton now on the other side of Whale Branch, but I mean, in the city, where are you gonna put it? Or unless you annex.
A light industrial district maybe? That seem appropriate or?
You could put it on the roof of your shopping plaza.
Well, you know what,
Well, that's
that
what
is
it
not
says now,
uncommon.
so that
People are
also
doing that.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
People are doing that.
I don't think
RMX. Yeah, RMX needs to go.
But what about about roof mounted in residential areas, and I'm thinking particularly historic district.
That's what it
Not a
says.
solar farm though.
But
No, I'm
that's
talking about two.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
that's
point.
regulated by the
Those are okay.
That's a good point. We should probably take out T4HN. Cause I
Yeah,
just
I don't think it should be all zones.
Think so.
It says any structure in the historic and visible from must be approved by the historic district. So I guess maybe that's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to the HRB.
Well, but if it's not in the historic district, if it's outside of the historic district and still within the residential neighborhood, do you want that?
Yes.
Well-
All zones?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with outside the historic district, but I think when you say all zones, you should say, an asterisk or something. You know, about the about the historic districts. And then you could say CA below or
Yeah,
something. Or even put in parentheses, CA below instead of an asterisk. But I don't see a reason to prohibit them in outside of the historic districts and conservation district.
I could see it used in the historic districts to like new structures.
What'd you say?
Oh, I was just saying, like, I don't see an issue seeing solar panels in the historic districts, you know, with whatever new structure, you know, new buildings, new construction.
Well, if it's a new structure in the historic district.
But it would still have to be
But it
approved
still
by
has to be approved by
the
the
Right,
HRB,
yeah.
right?
But is there any reason to prohibit them otherwise, like?
Well, and that's the thing though, because it says under A, any structure in the historic district that is visible from the street, so. If it's not in the historic district, then you're putting it on roofs that are visible from the street.
Right, but I don't find solar panels offensive
Okay.
at all. I mean,
Alright.
maybe other people do.
Some people, I think a lot of people do. I mean, a lot of times you will have that
we're
condition that they should not be visible, but I mean, you know.
well, I think that, you know, the historic district, the HRB should have authority over the district.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No,
But
I'm
you're talking
talking
about outside.
anything outside of the historic district.
Yeah, but I mean, we have design standards for other things. You know, they may not be, you know, oppressive, but I mean,
Well, if the house is already there and they're.
We've got them on top of this building now.
Yeah.
Well, they don't work. They're not really.
They don't work.
you're not using them?
Well,
Well,
that's a shame.
I think
So
when
they
they
never
built
get
it,
it.
whatever they got at a
never
short,
come up.
whatever they got in 2011, I guess. Well, I just heard this from me, but. You know, technology wasn't so great with whatever they bought.
No,
They died like years ago.
well,
They-
They
I
lasted
mean-
for 4 or 5 years and then creating a problem with the roof, and then the roof, it was in the budget, they're replacing the roof.
Because of
Without the
Next
panels.
fiscal year, without the, yeah, I
Oh,
think they're doing great.
interesting.
I'll have to ask them.
Well, you know, everybody gets those letters in the, you know, it's a big thing to have solar panels. And apparently it's a public good to do so, theoretically, in terms of, you know, clean energy and conserving resources and all that kind of stuff, so.
Yeah, I mean, if that's fine, you see CA, but I think we got limited the solar farm to light industrial. Or you take it out altogether, I mean, but I think light industrial is probably the only district that would be appropriate.
Now, public
Sorry.
furniture. I mean,
I think that, you know, there's a lot of stuff now that, you know, you have a little tiny solar, but they
Yeah.
power it or powered,
but
be surprised,
I think maybe public furniture covers it, but
yeah.
a homeowner couldn't put one in the right of way. I mean, it has to be owned by the municipality
Yeah, it does.
or something like that. So I don't know if that's 100% clear from that definition, public furniture.
Well, I actually have a bird bath in the backyard that is powered by solar, it makes it bubble. Pretty
Is
cool.
it visible from the street, Paul?
No, it's hidden away, you can't see it, it's hidden away.
Thank God. Not that a visit.
well, you wanna go down? Are we okay with all this stuff now?
Yeah, I think.
We're kind of on the.
What did we do with one? What was the final on one?
Limited to light industrial.
Yes, that's fine.
All right, and then food production,
Go down to C, non-conforming structure height. Provide the system extends no more than, it says 5 feet above the roof surface.
that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that should be deleted, yeah.
I mean, they're placed flat on the roof, aren't they? All of them?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, no, sometimes you have to angle it up.
would they angle it up 5 feet?
Well, I think this thing is really basically saying if you got a building that's too high, you can still put solar on top of it. And I guess the question is, if a building is too high, it's only legal by virtue, it's not conforming rights. Do we wanna allow it to even be higher by having a solar thing on top of it, or do we say no? That's an interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if the
Proposition.
5 feet has to be, that's really high.
So this is basically saying
Yeah.
yes, because 5 feet is so
You're
high
saying-
that nothing
You're
would.
saying if it's already illegal, I mean, if it's
Provide-
already too high, only if it's already higher than it should be, only because of non-conforming rights, we're still gonna let you have a solar thing on it, even though that makes it even higher. And that's more non-conforming, as long as it isn't more than 5
I'd
feet.
get rid of C.
Correct.
So I'm just wondering whether you get
Let's
rid
get
of
rid
it,
of-
and just say if you're non-conforming, you can't have any solar.
I don't think it should.
Maybe that's the
Well, and
answer.
then
Well,
maybe
the
we
the
have
ordinance
some-
says if you're non-conforming, you're not supposed to make any changes to it.
Well, that's
anyway.
true, that's right, so maybe you just get rid of the whole thing. For that reason, is you can't expand the non-conforming use.
But what if
That's
you,
right, you're not supposed to.
And can't you install solar panels elsewhere than on the roof? I mean, so you don't have to make that the most convenient place for it, but
All right, well, we got rid of that. No, let's move to food, we're almost there, no.
Yeah, the next
what,
page,
what about easements? Do we need that? I mean,
I don't know why we even read it.
I don't know, I mean, it would be obvious that a property owner would have to be negotiate with other landowners.
It
so
should
like,
be,
what would
right.
that involve? Like, please cut down your tree so I can have some.
I think it goes
solar
without
panels
saying,
or
I think it goes
So
without
should we
saying,
take it out?
I think so,
Yeah,
I think it goes without saying.
as the city sure ain't gonna do it,
Yeah.
you gotta cut down that oak tree.
All right. Oh, no, big food production. I thought it was interesting the way it's limited, but I just didn't wanna rock the boat here.
under vegetable garden number 2,
Yeah, I don't know why we're limiting it to certain districts. Maybe we can just put all zones?
yeah, all the zones sound good.
And then, and well,
well-
it's saying you can't have them in your front yard.
yeah, that's.
I've
that's the
seen
one I-
some in the front yard.
Oh, why is it different?
No, but no, it's.
Mixed in with
trees and
No,
flowers.
it's what he said you can have it in the front yard in T3, and I'd get rid of that.
I think when people start, it's one thing to, put, a couple of fruit trees in your front yard, but if all of a sudden your whole front yard is growing tomatoes, I don't think that's
No,
fair to the neighbors, right?
no.
Well, small.
I would get rid of that whole thing
I
from
mean,
T3 zone, et cetera.
this goes to my favorite statement from Bill, when I say, telling me that, a little old lady, Eula May has a bunch of tomato plants. In her yard. They're not gonna tell her no.
Yeah, well, I know, but and I agree with that they should be in the back of the house, but this little old lady.
Right.
She's got big trees in her backyard, she doesn't have any sun, and so she wants to have her tomatoes out front where she's got some sun.
And she's putting some zinnias there too,
Right.
along with the tomatoes. I mean,
Under vegetable garden, I would leave, these are typically situated behind the primary structure, period.
Yes.
That's it.
Right,
And
good.
then on number 1, farm, I would take out T3. You can leave T1, LI and IC.
why don't we have all zones for vegetable garden?
That's what we just.
We
We
do,
did change that?
We did.
Okay, I missed you, sorry.
Under community garden.
of at least one former community garden that was on a corner.
I don't see any problems. Could we just say
Not allowed.
I guess community garden, urban farm and green.
I think T urban farm, we could have T3 to it.
Well, I think community garden should be all zones.
Yeah. And can we add T3? Because, you know, it's suburban, if you get Salem Bay, why can't they have an urban farm? That would be cool.
Why not all zones?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
And green roofs and container gardens, would we want that all zones too?
yeah,
I'm sure.
I think so.
So you think
There you
a
go.
container garden is, on the roof is less offensive than solar panels?
Well, it wouldn't be on a slanted roof, it'd be behind a concrete probably.
Okay,
Maybe we should put that in the location.
Yeah, flat roof.
Yeah.
well, it says areas within and on a building parking area utilized for green spaces.
No.
You could do.
I think it's a fitting end. It's just Paul's last day.
You hear much, man, I'm coming Monday, or y'all kicking me out, I can't come in Monday.
That's what he said.
I don't
I
think
didn't say
Libby's,
that.
she hadn't sworn the oath yet, has she?
She doesn't start until July.
So can we make green roofs and container gardens all zones as well?
Yes.
We did, okay, all
Want to
right.
go down the last page, 21?
Very, not,
But that's just more about the, oh, wait, applicability.
Hey, we made it. Intersection.
yeah, just in time we can start chapter 2.
All right, so do you want some of those answers from chapter 8 before you actually vote on it next Monday?
I would like to see them because I think we still have some things left, such as the legal opinion and things like that. But before, not to.
Well, we got rid of a lot, so I don't know that it'll really have too much of an impact.
On page 21, about the location and setback of all these various things. It says they may encroach into any side or rear setbacks. So the little old lady's vegetable garden could go right up to the property line.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, there's a garden over there on, I think it's First Boulevard. And he's got it right up next to his neighbor's fence, and he's always growing beans and corn, and it looks really good. And, you know, no one seems to fuss about
I just don't like any of this stuff in the front yard, but that's just me.
Well,
Because I've had.
that's why we pushed them in that direction with what is said there.
Well, they still are allowed, aren't they? in the front?
Well, we didn't disallow.
Well, that's what I mean.
so,
Do we really want to allow them in the front yard?
The way things are going, you're gonna have to grow vegetables. I said the way things are growing, we might all have to grow vegetables.
so consistent with Mike's idea about saying at the end of the meeting what we want done as far as the drafts go. Mike, do you want this to be typed up or do you want to wait until we get our legal opinions and stuff like that and actually finish?
What's the will of the board? I'd like to see what the legal opinions are, quite frankly.
Me too.
There's one or two sections or items in there that are left.
I think it was just,
In the parking lot.
was it just on development agreements?
Yeah, but would that really affect this now?
I don't think it
I don't
really
think it
affects much, and we can probably modify it so that. Didn't we just get rid of it?
We just got rid of it.
We just got rid of it all, I don't know.
True.
No, but we
No.
put one in the parking lot that I thought
Well, maybe.
ought to still be in there.
I mean, I think
Yeah,
since you've gotten rid of the buffer area, I
Go
don't
back and
see
look at
why
it.
you couldn't vote on this. I don't think
Yeah.
it really affects.
It might, just to move something
We'll
else
still,
along.
we'll still,
But the buffer only, the one we got rid of only pertained to the wetland, not the buffer from the critical line.
Right,
Yeah, but that critical line is already in the code. It's already in the code. The critical
Okay.
line's already in the code.
Okay,
It's 30 and 50.
all right, okay, right.
I think we may be able to vote on this thing, I just sort of feel that we could move something else along, because. The next chapters after that, it's probably gonna be into the fall before we get
It
to
will be.
2, 3, and 4, because we want to do that all at once.
Yeah, if you wanna start the discussion on Monday night, then we'll just have really the road thing and.
We
The-
can.
can vote on that.
The one thing we left in the parking lot was 831, H I L,
Yeah, we just deleted them all.
H L. The
Or
only
even
one we
H,
left
which-
there.
Which is L. ABC.
I thought we took that out. That, I mean,
No, we
well,
took
it's a
it out
parking
and
lot
put it in the
subject to.
parking lot.
We just put L in there.
Yeah, L was the only one we left, said as a possible, and
And I don't know that we,
because of the implication of that.
and some of us were, you just take it out, you would say keep it in.
We took it out.
Pending,
I mean,
putting it back in.
I mean, we could leave a note, you could have a recommendation, you could approve it with a recommendation.
well, here's my point is that all of these new regulations apply to development agreement properties unless they otherwise do not.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're gonna determine that in this code. It might be on a case by case basis, and I don't know that we have to address it. I think that at some point in time, we just have this discussion about development agreements, and then maybe we just adopt a policy that Kurt will talk to the city manager
Yeah,
about enforcing it.
I'll
you know?
tell it to I'll send it to Ben, here, actually, called me Waters. And our city attorney and
He's probably watching this.
but I don't think it's dependent, like you said, I don't think this chapter matters, but I'll get you an opinion here.
Yeah. And if you,
Cause it affects a lot of stuff that's going on right now.
We
You
don't
you
like,
bring up a good point, cause I saw that it was like 10 years or something, or 5 years.
Yeah. yeah, I think it's worth taking.
These were approved before that code got adopted, so I don't know.
When South Carolina got into the zoning business, so like, it must have been the last state in the country. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And this city. I mean. And then I think the developers within the state rallied to the, ran to the legislature and said, we gotta. This whole thing is threatening us, and so. We gotta get our project approved and get exempt from continuing cultural work of land use regulations. And it was pretty clever. I haven't seen a statute like the one we have here. But I've sent it back to Kentucky to consider.
Did you?
I said. And then, I'm not promoting it, I'm just saying, since you guys have been complaining about this
Like a-
forever, here's a great idea, what South Carolina has done.
No, I mean,
It's got like a commission on it, adopted, I think.
Actually, Kentucky's the easiest state to do a planner. All laid out, everything runs smoothly.
Which
Would you agree?
I don't know that it's easy to be a planner, but it's a planning state.
Yes, well, everything's laid out.
It's, which is kind of remarkable, but it's,
But most city counties don't have planning.
So, well,
So.
there's 120
state statute.
There's 120 counties, it's the most counties of any state other than Texas, and a lot of them
They're all tiny.
don't, but, you know, the big urban areas plainly do. And because they've had zoning regulations for so long, in Louisville, they go back to the 1920s, and in Jefferson County, which is, will go back to the 40s. You can imagine there's a huge body of case law that deal with these things, where in South Carolina, because they haven't been in the business for very long, there just isn't much case law on a lot of stuff. So a lot of times when I talk about the context of hearing due process rights and so forth, it's because it's in South Carolina, it's probably become a more developing body of case law, whereas in other states, it's already established.
Okay, we need to give Kurt direction. Paul, do you think we need to have this published to us before our meeting?
I think so.
I think Kurt's recommendation that we could vote and approve it
Yeah.
without the legal opinion.
Yeah.
Subject to receipt, council's gotta act on it later. We could always revisit it, we could vote and approve it. And then revisit it, in the course of doing these others before it goes to council, if we find something contrary
Right.
in the legal opinion.
Well, do
Okay,
you
so
think
you're-
you could get the legal opinions to us by
So
Monday?
you're saying no,
I'm saying no.
Jim?
You're saying
Yes
no,
or
what?
no?
I'm
having
saying,
this published.
I'm saying we can vote on this.
So,
every way we've got.
yes, we want to.
I think we should try.
I agree.
Let's vote on
And
it.
we might have some comment on Monday that delays us, somebody makes it, But I think we should
Well, I
give it an,
bet we will.
yeah, I think we should give it the old college try.
Okay, so you don't have to produce it until our meeting.
We will send it out to you tomorrow before the end of the day and update the packet and.
Legal meetings don't have to get it to us before.
Oh, right, but the
It's already been published, so notice, so that's fine, we'll just update the packet tomorrow.
And then also, we'd like to have 2, 3, 4 in full.
Okay.
2, 3, and 4 are gonna need a lot of work.
Printed in full.
But we're not gonna take.
Okay, we'll
up
just have that available to you.
Okay.
Well,
If you wanna discuss it, you can start discussing.
if we have time, we could start on chapter 2 if we,
Sure.
I just hate doing that, other than getting an overview. I just don't think the meeting itself is conducive to these kind of discussions.
Okay, we can just do an overview.
Well, Kurt's already done the overview. for
I
that.
could just present
I
it.
mean, we
Yeah.
can
Well,
say,
you've already printed it, we've got it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, we just
So-
changed, from a hearing, we kind of go into a work session.
Yes.
At the hearing, 'cause we got the.
Just have a short overview and then you can get started on the next work
Do
session.
we want to set another work session? Or-
Well, since Bill and
Oh,
Clint,
We'll wait till Monday
Clinton
night.
are here, we could do that.
Wait till
Yeah,
Monday night.
I think Monday night would be a good time.
And we need to, hopefully Libby will be coming to the meeting.
So,
I think she said she can or something.
Well, maybe we can reach out to her about availability by email in advance, so we would have that information.
okay, I can email her tomorrow. She sends me lots of emails, so I'm
Okay.
not worried.
She's not shy.
Okay, well. I guess we're adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.